Imagine waking up one day and discovering that you have the ability to transform your life with a single thought. This thought is the key to opening hidden doors, overcoming barriers that once seemed insurmountable, and seizing opportunities that previously appeared out of reach. This is not a fantasy, but a reality that Orison Swett Marden explores in his work, The Power of Opportunity. In a world where stars seem within reach, and where the boldest dreams can become reality, Marden takes us on a fascinating journey through the power of opportunity. This book is not just a guide, but a map leading us to discover hidden treasures within ourselves. As we progress through these pages, we will unravel the mystery of how our decisions, attitudes, and vision can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Imagine yourself at a crossroads where every path you choose has the potential to lead you to new heights. Imagine having the knowledge and inspiration to choose the right path, the one that will guide you toward a life filled with success, fulfillment, and joy. In The Power of Opportunity, Marden teaches us that every moment is an opportunity waiting to be discovered. Every challenge is a door waiting to be opened, and every dream is a destiny waiting to be achieved. Prepare yourself to dive into a narrative that challenges your beliefs and expands your horizons. Get ready to discover the power that lies within your hands and mind, and explore how you can make the most of every opportunity that life offers you. In this journey, you will find not only inspiration, but also practical tools to transform your life and achieve the success you've always dreamed of. So close your eyes, open your mind, and join us on this revelatory adventure. The power of opportunity is about to unfold, and you are about to discover the extraordinary potential that awaits you. Man and opportunity. No man is born into this world whose work does not come with him. Lowell. Things do not appear in this world until someone brings them forth. Garfield. Vigilance to see the opportunity, tact and boldness to seize the opportunity, strength and perseverance to exploit the opportunity to its maximum potential. These are the martial virtues that must guide success. Austin Phelps. I will find a way or make one. There has never been a day that did not bring its own opportunity to do good that could never have been done before and that will never be done again. W. H. Barley. Take this same minute seriously. Do what you can do or dream what you can do. Comment if we succeed. What will the world say? Asked Captain Berry with amazement when Nelson explained his carefully laid plan before the Battle of the Nile. There is no if in this case, replied Nelson. We will succeed, that's certain. Who will live to tell the tale is a very different question. Then, as his captains rose from the council to head to their respective ships, he added, Before this hour tomorrow, I will have won a title of nobility or a place at Westminster Abbey. His quick eye and bold mind saw an opportunity for glorious victory where others saw only a probable defeat. Is it possible to cross the pass? Asked Napoleon of the engineers sent to explore the dreaded St. Bernard Pass. Perhaps, came the hesitant reply. It's within the realm of possibility. Forward, then, said the little corporal, not paying attention to their account of seemingly insurmountable difficulties. England and Austria mocked with disdain the idea of bringing through the Alps, where no wheel had ever rolled, nor could ever roll, an army of 60,000 men with heavy artillery, tons of cannonballs, and bulky munitions. But the siege of Genoa was at its end, and the victorious Austrians were thundering at the gates of Nice. Napoleon was not the man who would fail his former comrades in danger when this impossible feat was accomplished. Some saw that it could have been done much earlier. Others excused the fact that such gigantic obstacles were faced, calling them insurmountable. Many commanders had possessed the necessary supplies, the tools, and the sturdy soldiers, but they lacked the courage and resolution of Bonaparte, who was not intimidated by the mere difficulties, no matter how great, but who, out of his own need, created and dominated his opportunity. Grant. In New Orleans, having just been severely injured from a horseback fall, Grant received orders to take command at Chattanooga, which was besieged by the Confederates, and whose surrender seemed to be a matter of days, with surrounding hills lit at night by enemy fires and supplies cut off. Despite suffering greatly, he immediately gave instructions for his transfer to the new theater of operations by transport along the Mississippi, Ohio, and one of its tributaries, being carried in a litter by horses for many miles through the desert, and finally, upon arrival in the city, he was carried to Chattanooga on the shoulders of 4 men. Things took a different turn. Immediately a leader had arrived to meet the situation. The army felt the domination of his power, and before even being able to mount his horse, he ordered an advance. Despite the enemy contesting the ground foot by foot, the surrounding hills were quickly secured by Union soldiers. Were these events the result of chance, or were they the product of the general's indomitable determination? Things adjusted when Horace, accompanied by 2 companions, held off 90,000 Tuscans until the bridge over the Tiber was destroyed. When Caesar, seeing his army in difficulty, took the spear and shield, he fought while reorganizing his men and tore victory from defeat. When Winclide, gathering in his heart a swarm of Austrian lances, opened a path for his comrades to rush toward freedom, Napoleon for years lost no battle in which he was personally involved. When Wellington fought in many climates without being conquered, when Ney on 100 battlefields turned an apparent disaster into a brilliant triumph, when Perry left the Lawrence unused and rode to Niagara, silencing the British cannons, when Sheridan arrived from Winchester just as the Union retreat was turning into defeat and changed the course of events. Riding along the line, history offers thousands of examples of men who seized opportunities to achieve seemingly impossible results. Compared to the less determined, quick decisions and resolute actions sweep the world before them. It is true that there was only one Napoleon, but on the other hand, the Alps opposing the progress of the average young American are not as high or as dangerous as the peaks crossed by the great Corsican. Do not wait for extraordinary opportunities. Take advantage of ordinary ones and make them great. On the morning of September 6, 1838, a young girl in the Longston lighthouse between England and Scotland was awakened by cries of agony heard above the roar of the wind and waves. An unusually violent storm had broken out, and her parents did not hear the cries. However, using a telescope, she spotted 9 people clinging to the windlass of a shipwreck, whose bow hung from the rocks half a mile away. "We can do nothing," said Williams Darling, the lighthouse keeper. "We must rescue them," his daughter exclaimed, pleading with her parents, tears in her eyes. Finally, the father responded, "Very well, Grace, I will be convinced, even though it goes against my better judgment." Like a feather in the whirlwind, the small boat swayed in the tumultuous sea. But driven by the gust that swept the cruel waves, the cries of the shipwrecked seemed to turn their frail ropes into steel cables. An unexpected strength arose from somewhere, and the young heroine rode in sync with her father. At last, the 9 were saved. "God bless you, for you are a beautiful young English girl," said one poor man, gazing in awe at the wonderful young woman who, that day, had accomplished an exploit that added more glory to England than the deeds of many of its monarchs. "If you let me try, I think I can do something useful," said a young man who had been employed as a sculptor at Signor Falero's house. According to the story told by George Carey Eggleston, a large company had been invited to a banquet, and just before dinner the confectioner, who was a major adornment for the table, sent word that he had ruined his centerpiece. "What?" exclaimed the butler, astonished. "And who are you?" "I am Antonio Canova, the grandson of Pisano," replied the pale-faced man. "What can you do?" asked the butler. "I can make something for the center of the table. If you let me try, I will show you," said Canova. The butler didn't know what to do, so he told Antonio to step forward and see what he could do. Asking for some butter, the sculptor quickly molded a large reclining lion, which the admiring butler placed on the table. Dinner was announced, and many merchants, princes, and noblemen, among the most notable in Venice, were introduced to the dining room. Among them were skilled art critics who, upon seeing the butter lion, forgot the purpose for which they had come. So stunned were they by such a work of genius. They examined the lion closely and asked Signor Falero which great sculptor had been persuaded to waste his talent on such a fleeting material. Falero could not say, and then asked the butler, who introduced Antonio to the guests. When the distinguished guests learned that the lion had been created in a short time by a sculptor, the scene turned into a celebration in his honor. The wealthy host declared that he would pay the young man's fees to the best masters and kept his promise. Antonio did not let his good fortune corrupt him. He remained the same simple, serious, and faithful young man who had worked so hard to become a good stone carver in Pisano's workshop. Perhaps some have not heard how young Antonio seized this first great opportunity, but everyone knows Canova, one of the greatest sculptors of all time. Weak men wait for opportunities, strong men create them. The best men, says E. H. Chapping, are not those who waited for opportunities, but those who seized them, besieged the opportunity, conquered the opportunity, and made opportunity their servant. There may be only one chance in a million to receive unusual help, but there are always opportunities that you can improve to take advantage of, if only you act. The lack of opportunity is always the excuse of a weak and hesitant mind. Opportunities, every life is full of them. Every lesson at school or college is an opportunity. Every exam, every patient, every newspaper article, every client, every sermon, every business transaction is an opportunity to be educated, strong, honest, to be a friend. Every trial of self-confidence is a great opportunity. Every responsibility imposed on your strength and honor is invaluable. Existence is the privilege of effort, and when it is accomplished as a man, the opportunities for success according to your attitude will come faster than you can use them. If a slave like Fred Douglass, who didn't even own his own body, could rise as a speaker, editor, and statesman, what should the poorest of whites be compared to Douglass? It is the idle man, not the great worker, who always complains about not having time or opportunities. Some young people will make better use of the opportunities that many waste carelessly, and these others will profit from them in their lives, just as bees extract honey from every flower. Every person they meet, every circumstance of the day, adds something to their reserve of useful knowledge or personal power. No one is exempt from the visit of fortune at least once in their life, says a cardinal. But when he finds that someone is not ready to receive it, it enters through the door and exits through the window. Cornelius Vanderbilt found his opportunity in the steamship and decided to associate himself with steam navigation. To the surprise of all his friends, he abandoned his prosperous business and took command of one of the first steamships launched, with a salary of $1,000 per year. Livingston and Fulton had acquired the exclusive right to navigate steamships on the waters of New York, but Vanderbilt considered the law unconstitutional and defied it until it was repealed. He quickly became the owner of steamships. When the government offered a large subsidy for European mail transport, he proposed to carry it for free and offer a better service. His offer was accepted, and he quickly obtained a massive amount of freight and passenger traffic, laying the foundation for the vast Vanderbilt system we know today. The young Philip Barmort joined the long caravan of 40 miners and crossed the great American desert with all his belongings in a prairie wagon pulled by mules. The hard work and the constantly saved profits from the mines allowed him 6 years later to venture into the grain and warehouse business in Milwaukee. In 9 years, he earned $500,000, but he saw his great opportunity in Grant's order at Richmond. One morning in 1864, he knocked on Plankington's door, his partner in the pork-packing business. "I'm taking the next train to New York," he said, "to sell pork. Grant has the rebels by the throat, and pork is going to drop to $12 a barrel." That was his opportunity. He went to New York, offered pork in large quantities at $40 a barrel, and his proposal was enthusiastically received. The savvy speculators on Wall Street mocked the young Westerner and told him that pork would rise to $60 because the war was not yet over. However, Mr. Armour kept selling, and as Grant advanced, Richmond fell, pork dropped to $12 a barrel, and Mr. Armour made $2 million. John D. Rockefeller found his opportunity in oil. He noticed that there was a large population in the country with very little light. Oil was abundant, but the refining process was rudimentary, and the product was inferior and unsafe. There lay Rockefeller's opportunity. Partnering with Samuel Andrews, the janitor of a mechanical workshop where they had both worked, he launched a one-barrel still in 1870. By using an improved process discovered by his partner, they made superior oil and quickly prospered. They admitted Mr. Flagler as a third partner, but Andrews remained dissatisfied. "What do you want for your share?" asked Rockefeller. Andrews carelessly wrote down $1 million on a piece of paper. Within 24 hours, Mr. Rockefeller handed him the sum, saying, "$1 million is cheaper than 10 in 20 years." The business of the small refinery, barely worth $1,000 for the building and equipment, became the Standard Oil Trust, capitalized at $90 million, with shares trading at 170, giving it a market value of $150 million. Here are examples of how to seize opportunities to make money. But fortunately, there is a new generation of electricians, engineers, scientists, artists, authors, and poets who find opportunities as numerous as thistles to do something nobler than simply amassing wealth. Wealth is not a goal to fight for, but an opportunity. It is not the pinnacle of a man's career, but an incident. Mrs. Elizabeth Wright, a Quaker lady, saw her opportunity in the prisons of England in 1813. Between 300 and 400 nearly naked women were crowded into a single pavilion of Newgate in London, awaiting judgment. They had neither beds nor pajamas, but the elderly women and young girls slept in the dirt and rags on the floor. No one seemed to care about them, and the government merely provided food to keep them alive. Mrs. Fry visited Newgate, calmed the screaming crowd, and announced that she wished to establish a school for the young girls. Furthermore, she asked them to choose a teacher among themselves. They were surprised, but chose a young woman who had been incarcerated for stealing a watch. Within 3 months, these wild creatures, as they were often called, became harmless and kind. The reform spread until the government legalized the system, and good women from all over Britain became interested in educating and dressing these outcasts. 80 years later, her plan was adopted worldwide. In England, a child had been run over by a carriage, and bright blood was flowing from a severed artery. No one seemed to know what to do until another child, Ashley Cooper, took his handkerchief and stopped the bleeding by pressing on the wound. The praise he received for saving the child's life encouraged him to become a surgeon, becoming the most remarkable of his time. "The moment comes for the young surgeon," says Arnold, when, after long waiting, patient work and experience, he suddenly finds himself facing his first critical operation. The surgeon is not there. Time is pressing. Life and death are at stake. Is he up to the urgency? Can he replace the great surgeon and do the work? If he can, he is the only one among all others who is necessary. His opportunity presents itself, he faces it. Will he confess his ignorance and incapacity, or will he take a step toward glory and fortune? It is for him alone to decide. You are ready for a great opportunity, and he invited a friend from Salem. After dinner, the friend said, "I tried to persuade Houter to write a story based on a legend from Acadia that is still current there, the legend of a young girl who, during the dispersal of the Acadians, was separated from her lover and spent her life waiting for him and searching for him, only finding him to die in a hospital when they were both elderly." Longfellow wondered why the legend did not attract Houston's attention, and said to him, "If you are really determined not to use it for a narrative, will you let me have it for a poem?" Houston agreed, and promised not to treat the subject in prose until Longfellow saw what he could do with it in verse. Longfellow seized his opportunity and offered the world Evangeline, or the success of the Acadians. Open eyes will discover opportunities everywhere. Open ears will never miss hearing the calls of those perishing in search of help. Open hearts will never lack worthy objects to offer their gifts to, and open hands will never lack noble work to accomplish. Everyone had noticed the overflow when a solid object is immersed in a vessel filled with water, although no one had used their knowledge that the body displaces its exact volume of liquid. But when Archimedes observed the phenomenon, he discovered an easy method to find the cubic content of objects, no matter their irregular shape. Everyone knew the consistency with which a suspended weight oscillates from side to side when displaced, until the air resistance brings it to rest. But no one considered this information to have practical importance. However, the young Galileo, observing a lamp accidentally left swinging in the Pisa Cathedral, saw in the regularity of these oscillations the useful principle of the pendulum. Even the iron doors of a prison were not enough to deter him from his research. He experimented with the straw in his cell and learned valuable lessons about the relative resistance of tubes and rods of the same diameter. For a long time, astronomers knew of Saturn's rings and considered them mere exceptional curiosities to the supposed law of planet formation. But Herschel saw that instead, they were the only visible proof of certain stages in the invariable process of star formation. And from this silent testimony, he added a valuable chapter to the scientific history of creation. There was not a single sailor in Europe who did not wonder what might lie beyond the Western Ocean. But it was Columbus who took it upon himself to boldly venture into unknown seas and discover a new world. Countless apples had fallen from the trees, always striking men's heads as if to make them think. But Newton was the first to realize that they fall according to the same law that keeps the planets in orbit and prevents all the atoms in the universe from being hurled wildly toward chaos. Lightning had dazzled the eyes, and thunder had shaken the ears of men since the days of Adam, in a vain attempt to draw their attention to the omnipresent and great energy of electricity. but the celestial artillery's discharges were only perceived as blind terror and noise until Franklin, through a simple experiment, demonstrated that lightning is nothing more than a simple manifestation of force, resistant but controllable, as abundant as air and water. Like many others, these men are considered great simply because they improved the opportunities common to all humankind. Read the story of any successful person and observe the moral told thousands of years ago by Solomon. Do you see a man diligent in his business? He will stand before kings. This proverb is well illustrated by the career of the industrialist Franklin, who stood before 5 kings and distinguished himself among others. He who improves an opportunity sows a seed that will bear fruit in opportunities for himself and others. All those who have worked honestly in the past have contributed to bringing knowledge and comfort to an increasing number of people. The sober, frugal, energetic, and skillful mechanic, the young educated man, the bureaucrat, and the employee now have at their disposal more numerous and accessible paths than ever before in the history of the world. Not long ago there were only 3 or 4 professions. Now there are 50, and the trades that once had one are now numbering in the hundreds. "What is it called?" asked a visitor in a workshop when shown, among many gods, a statue whose face was hidden by hair and had wings on its feet. "Opportunity," replied the sculptor. "Why is its face hidden?" "Because men rarely recognize it when it approaches them." "Why does it have wings on its feet?" "Because it flies away quickly, and once gone it cannot be caught." "Opportunity has hair in front," said a Latin author, "but is bald behind. If you seize it by the hair, you can hold on to it, but if it escapes, even Jupiter himself will not be able to catch it again." "But what is the best opportunity for one who cannot or will not use it?" "It happened to me," said a ship captain, "to meet the Central America steamer in distress. Night was approaching, and the sea was raging, but I called the stranded steamer and asked if they needed help. "I'm sinking," shouted the captain. "Wouldn't it be better to embark your passengers right now?" "No, I'll stay with you until tomorrow," replied the captain. "I'll try, but wouldn't it be better to board your passengers now?" I tried to position myself next to them, but in the night, with the rough sea, I couldn't maintain my position, and I no longer saw the steamer. An hour and a half after saying, "Stay with me until tomorrow," his ship, his living cargo, sank, and the captain, crew, and most passengers found their tombs in the depths. The captain appreciated the importance of the opportunity he had neglected, now out of reach. But what was the profit of his bitterness when his last moments arrived? How many lives were sacrificed because of his hope and indecision? Just like him, the weak, the lazy, and those without a purpose often find little meaning in the simplest of opportunities until they learn too late the old lesson that the mill cannot grind the water that has passed. These people always arrive a little too late or a little too early in whatever they attempt. "Everyone has 3 hands," says John Beck, "a right hand, a left hand, and a little hand behind. Children arrived late to school and were undisciplined in their household tasks. Then they got used to it, and now when responsibility calls them, they think that if they had gone yesterday, they would have had the situation under control, or that they might manage it tomorrow. They remember many opportunities to make money or know how to do so at another time than the present. They see how to improve or help others in the future, but they do not perceive any opportunity in the present. They cannot seize their chance." Joe Stalker, the rear brakeman of the housing train, was very popular among all the railway workers. Passengers liked him because he was eager to please and always ready to answer any questions, but he did not realize the full responsibility of his position. He took things calmly and sometimes tipped, and if someone reprimanded him, he would smile and respond so kindly that the friend thought they had exaggerated the danger. "Thank you, everything is fine, don't worry." One night there was a strong snowstorm and his train was delayed. Joe complained about having to do extra work because of the storm and secretly drank from an empty bottle from time to time. He soon became very cheerful, but the conductor and train driver were vigilant and anxious. Between 2 stations, the train stopped abruptly. The locomotive had exploded. An express was due to pass on the same track in a few minutes. The conductor rushed to the rear car and ordered Joe to return with the red light. The brakeman started laughing and said, "No hurry, wait until I put on my coat." The conductor replied seriously, "Don't waste a minute, Joe, the express is coming." "Okay," said Joe with a smile. The conductor rushed toward the engine, but the brakeman didn't leave immediately. He stopped to put on his coat, took another swig from the empty bottle to warm himself, then slowly picked up the lantern and, whistling, calmly made his way to the track. He had not taken 10 steps when he heard the whistle of the express. He ran toward the bend, but it was already too late. In one horrific minute, the express's locomotive collided with the stopped train, and the cries of the injured passengers mixed with the sound of escaping steam. Later, when they inquired about Joe, he had disappeared, but the next day he was found in a barn, delirious, swinging an empty lantern in front of an imaginary train and shouting that he had it. He was taken home and then to an asylum. There is no sadder sound in that miserable place than the incessant moan, "Oh, if only I had eyes, if only I had," from the unfortunate brakeman whose criminal indulgence caused the loss of many lives. "Oh, if only he had," is the silent cry of many men who would give their own lives for the opportunity to go back and correct the mistakes of the past. There are moments, says Dean Alford, that are worth more than years. We cannot avoid it. There is no proportion between intervals of time in importance or value. 5 minutes lost and unconsidered may contain the event of a lifetime, and who can know when this crucial moment will come to us? What we call a tipping point, says Arnold, is simply an opportunity that sums up and leads to a result. Prior training, accidental circumstances, mean nothing except to those who have been trained to seize them. The problem with us is that we are always looking for a princely opportunity to acquire wealth, fame, or merit. We are dazzled by what Emerson calls the superficial Americanism of the time. We wait for mastery without learning, knowledge, or study, and we want wealth on credit. Young people, why are you here all day doing nothing? The entire earth was occupied before your birth. It has ceased to bear its fruit. All the seats are occupied. The posts are all taken. The opportunities are all lost. The resources of your country have been fully developed. All the secrets of nature discovered. There is no way to use these passing moments to improve or benefit others. The competition in modern existence is so fierce that you must be content with earning an honest living. You have been given the gift of life at this progressive time when all the experience of the past accumulates for your inspiration, simply so you can add one element to the sum total of purely animal existence. Born in an era and country where knowledge and opportunities abound as never before, how can you stand idle, asking for God's help for a job for which He has given you the faculties and strength needed? Even when the chosen people thought their progress was hindered by the Red Sea and their leader turned to seek divine help, the Lord said, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward." With the world full of work to be done, with human nature so made that always a kind word or insignificant help can stop the tide of disaster for a companion or clear his path to success, with our own faculties so disposed that in honest, sincere, and persistent effort we find our greatest good, and with countless noble examples to encourage us, we must make every moment lead us to the threshold of a new opportunity. Do not wait for your opportunity. Do it as Pastor Ferguson did when he calculated the distances of the stars with a string of glass beads, or as George Stephenson did when he mastered the rules of mathematics with a piece of chalk on the dirty sides of coal wagons in the mines. As Napoleon did in 100 impossible situations. Do it like all leaders in war and peace built their opportunities for success. Golden opportunities mean nothing to laziness, but work makes those opportunities more frequent, whether they are golden or not. There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. We must take the tide when it is at the flood, or lose our ventures. Never again will that opportunity return. So seize the moment when fortune smiles and duty points the way. Do not turn aside by fear of the spectre, nor stop even though pleasure calls to you from its shadow. Move boldly toward your goal. One seeks a man, one seeks names, not systems. Men who are apt and wise, not stiff faces. Not riches in mountains, nor power with gracious smiles, nor even the mighty pen. One seeks men. Everyone cries, "Where is the man who will save us? We want his name." Do not look so far. This man is within reach. This man is you. It is me. It is each of us. To make a man, nothing is more difficult if you do not know how to want it. Nothing is easier if you want it. Alexander Dumas, Diogenes searched with a lantern at noon in ancient Athens for a perfectly honest man, and did so in vain. Once in the marketplace, he cried out loudly, "Listen to me, men!" And when the crowd gathered around him, he said, "I care not for contempt, I called for men, not pygmies." Above every profession, occupation, and vocation, the world has a permanent view. One seeks a man. One seeks a man who does not lose his individuality in a crowd, someone who has the courage of his convictions, who is not afraid to say no, even if everyone else says yes. We need a man who, though driven by a powerful purpose, does not let a great capacity for smallness paralyze, distort, or mutilate his being. One seeks a man who does not allow an excessive development of one ability to atrophy or inhibit his other faculties. One seeks a man who is greater than his vocation, who does not regard his profession as merely a way to make a living, but who sees it as personal development, education, culture, discipline and instruction, character and manliness. There are 1,000 vacant pulpits in a single religious denomination of idle preachers on the market, while another 1,000 ecclesiastical committees roam the country in search of men to fill these same vacant pulpits, and search in vain in a direction sufficient, at least to an horizon as broad as the opportunities of the time and the urgent need for good men. One seeks a courageous man who is not cowardly in any part of his nature. We need a balanced man who is not cursed with a small weakness that paralyzes his usefulness and neutralizes his powers. One seeks a man who is symmetrical and not unilateral in his development, who has not dedicated all his energies to a narrow specialty to the detriment of all other branches of his life, which have withered and died. We demand a man who is vast and has a complete vision of things, a man who combines common sense with his theories, who does not let university education ruin his practical, everyday life, a man who prefers substance to appearance, and who regards his good name as an invaluable treasure. One seeks a man who, though not a stunted mushroom, is full of life and fire, but whose passions are trained to serve a strong will in the service of a delicate conscience, who has learned to love all beauty, whether of nature or art, to hate all baseness and to respect others as himself. The world seeks an educated man in all respects, whose sense is pushed to its keenest sensitivity, whose brain is cultivated, sharp, incisive, vast, whose hands are skilled, whose eyes are alert, sensitive, microscopic, whose heart is tender, magnanimous, true. The whole world is seeking such a man. Although there are millions of unemployed people, it is almost impossible to find the right man in almost all fields of life. And yet everywhere we see the advertisement, "One seeks a man." In his famous essay on education, Rousseau says, "According to the order of nature, since men are equal, their common vocation is the profession of humanity, and whoever is well educated to fulfill the duty of a man cannot be poorly prepared to exercise any profession related to it. I care not whether my pupil is destined to the ministry, to the pulpit, or to the profession of lawyer. Nature has destined us to the professions of human life before our place in society. Living is the profession I want to teach him. When he has completed that, it is true that he will not be a soldier, nor a lawyer, nor a clergyman. He will first be a man. Fortune may move him from one rank to another as it pleases, and he will always be in his place." A small and short doctor of divinity stood on a step during a large Baptist convention and said, "Thank God for being a Baptist." The audience could not hear, and he shouted louder, "Climb higher," someone said. "I can't," he replied. "Being a Baptist is the highest one can attain. But there is something higher than being a Baptist, and that is being a man. As Emerson says, Taliant's question remains the most important. Is he rich, engaged, well-intentioned? Does he have this or that ability? Is he part of the movement, the establishment? Does he defend something? He must be good in his kind. That is all the common sense of humanity demands." When Garfield was asked as a child what he wanted to become, he answered, "First, I must become a man. If I don't succeed in that, I won't accomplish anything. Montaigne says that our work is not to form a soul alone or a body alone, but to form a man. A great necessity in the world today is for men and women who are good animals to bear the attention of our civilization. Both must have good bodies and an excess of animal spirit. What is more glorious than magnificent manhood animated by minds overflowing with health? It is a sad sight to see thousands of graduates each year from our prestigious institutions whose goal is to make strong, independent and self-sufficient men, turning into shrubs instead of sturdy oaks, into memory glands instead of men, into defenseless shields instead of self-sufficient ones, into sickly beings instead of robust ones, into weak ones instead of strong, bent instead of upright. So many promising youth are never a completed name. Character sympathizes with the nature of the body and assumes it unconsciously. A bad-tempered, grumpy, and sick man cannot develop the vigor and strength of character that is possible for a man who is healthy, robust, and joyful. There is an inherent love in human lamentation for integrity, a demand that man reach the highest level, just as there is an inherent protest or contempt for avoidable deficiency. Nature also demands that man always be at the peak of his condition, as if we were on the shore of the sea while the tide rises. A wave reaches the shore much higher than all the previous ones, then it recedes, and for a time none of the following waves reaches its level. But after a certain time, the whole sea is there and beyond. Similarly, from time to time, a man appears who is above his peers, showing that nature has not lost its ideal, and after a while even the average man will surpass the highest wave of humanity that has been given to the world. Pericles traveled around Greece for many years, studying the most beautiful features of magnificent women, obtaining here an eye, there a forehead and nose, here a grace, and there a beauty mark for his famous portrait of a perfect woman who charmed the world. Thus the future man will be a compound of many elements in one. He will absorb not weakness and folly, but strength and virtues from other types of men. He will be raised to the highest power, becoming a man centered on himself, equipped and always in control of himself. His sensitivity will not be dulled or blunted by the violation of the laws of nature. All his character will be impressionable and respond to the most delicate touches of nature. The first requirement of any education and discipline must be the matter of the man. The resistant material must come from well-developed, robust trees. It can become a mast, a piano, or an exquisite sculpture. Time and patience allow the young tree to transform into an adult tree. Similarly, through discipline, education, and experience, the young man becomes a man on mental, moral, and physical levels. If the young man starts with the firm determination that every statement he makes will be the exact truth, it will result that every promise will be kept to the letter, every appointment will be respected with the strictest fidelity, and full consideration for others' time. If he considers his reputation as an invaluable treasure, if he feels the eyes of the world are upon him, and that he must not deviate even a little from truth and right, by adopting such a stance from the start, he could have, like George Bifodi, almost unlimited credit and the trust of all who know him. What are palaces and furnishings? What can a man do to cover a continent with his titles or an ocean with his trade compared to conscious uprightness? A face that never pales before the voice of the accuser, a chest that never quivers with fear of exposure, and a heart that could be turned inside out without revealing a single stain of dishonor, having done no harm to anyone, nor signed a document that the purest angel in heaven has not witnessed. To walk and live with an education far from what does not belong to you, with nothing standing between your desire and its gratification, except the invisible law of uprightness, that is to be a man. Man is the only thing that exists, and he is greater than the universe. All ages have attempted to produce a perfect model. Only one complete man has evolved. Yet even the best are only prophecies of what is to come. What is a state? It is not high ramparts, worked terraces, thick walls, or fortified gates. It is not proud cities with spires and crowned turrets, nor wide bays and ports with large cannons, nor courts adorned with stars and glitter where the baseness of eyebrows perfumes pride. No, it is the men of great spirit with powers far superior to those of brutes, whether in the forest, at the reins, or on guard, like those beasts emerging from cold rocks and rugged thorns. Men who know their duties but also their rights, and who, knowing them, dare to defend them, prevent the decisive blow, and crush the tyrant while breaking the chain. William Jones, may God give us men. An age like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men whose lust for position does not kill, men whom the spoils of office cannot buy, men who have opinions and a will, men who possess honor, men who do not lie, men capable of confronting a demagogue and despising his treacherous flattery without blinking, men who are tall, crowned by the sun, living above the mist in public duty and private thought, The most beautiful flowers and the tallest and strongest trees reach for the sky even in black soil. Among the rocks, J.G. Holland, poverty is very terrible and sometimes kills the soul within us, but it is the northern wind that strikes men until they are transformed into Vikings, while the soft and pleasant southern wind rocks them into lotus dreams. Poverty is the sixth sense, says a German proverb. Not every calamity is a curse, and early adversity is always a blessing. Overcome difficulties teach and encourage us in our future struggles. There is no doubt that the captains of today's history, using the term in a broader sense, are men who began their lives as poor children. It is common evidence that humanity is the ladder of youthful ambition. Shakespeare, "I am a court girl," said a pretty little girl at a children's party in Denmark. "My father is the butler, which is a very high position, and those whose names end in Zen," she added, "can never be anything at all. You have to raise your arms high and keep your elbows sharp to keep those Zen people at a good distance. But my daddy can buy candy for $100 and give it to the children," exclaimed the daughter of the rich merchant Peterson. "Can your daddy do that?" "Yes," replied the daughter of a publisher. "My daddy can put your daddy and everyone else in the newspaper. Everyone fears him, my daddy says, because he can do whatever he wants with the paper." "Oh, if only I could be one of them," thought a little boy who leaned through the door crack with permission from the cook for whom he had turned the roaster, but not for his parents who had not a penny more, and whose name ended in sen. Later, when the children from the party had become men and women, some of them went to visit a magnificent house filled with all kinds of beautiful and precious objects. There they met the owner, who once had been that same child, who considered it a great privilege to spy on them through a crack in the door while they played. He had become the great sculptor Thorez Wollston. This sketch is an adaptation of a story by the son of a poor Danish shoemaker, whose name did not prevent him from becoming famous. Hans Christian Andersen. "I have no fear of dying from hunger, father," said the deaf child, begging to be removed from the poorhouse and allowed to struggle for an education. "We are in the midst of abundance, and I know how to avoid hunger. The Hottentots survive for a long time with only a little chewing gum. Also, when they are hungry, a belt around the body is enough. I can't do that. The hedges provide blackberries and nuts, while the fields of turnips and a pile of hay make a fine bed." Poor deaf boy, son of a drunkard father who was believed to be capable of nothing better than making shoes as a beggar, he became one of the greatest biblical scholars in the world. He wrote his first book in vice. Creon was a Greek slave, as told by a writer in Washington, Kate Field, but he was also a slave to the genius of art. Beauty was his god, and he worshipped it with delight. It was after the rejection of the great Persian invader, when a law was in effect prohibiting anyone from embracing art under penalty of death, except for free men, that Creon worked in a group where he hoped one day to receive praise from Phidias, the greatest sculptor alive, and even from Pericles. What was he to do with the marble career before him? Creon had placed his head, his heart, his soul, and his life on his knees. Day after day he prayed for new inspiration, new skills. He believed, grateful and proud, that Apollo, answering his prayers, had guided his hand and breathed life into the figures that seemed to animate them. But now, all the gods seemed to have abandoned him. Cleone, his devoted sister, felt the blow as deeply as her brother. "Aphrodite, immortal, high daughter of Zeus, my queen, patron goddess, in your sanctuary where I daily offered my gifts, be now my friend, my brother's friend," she pleaded. Then she said to her brother, "O Creon, go to the basement under our house. It is dark, but I will bring you light and food. Keep working, for the gods will help us." In the basement, Creon was kept and cared for by his sister day and night. He continued his glorious and dangerous work. At that time, all of Greece was invited to Athens to view an art exhibition. The exhibition was held on the Agora, presided over by Pericles. Beside him were Aspasia, Phidias, Socrates, Sophocles, and other renowned men. The works of the great masters were there, but a group much more beautiful than the others, a group even Apollo had decided to sculpt, attracted universal attention while also arousing the jealousy of rival artists. Who is the sculptor of this group? No one could say. The heralds repeated the question but got no answer. A mystery might be the work of an agitated slave. A beautiful young girl, her dress in disarray but scattered, with an expression of falling in her eyes and her lips sealed, was dragged onto the agora. "This woman!" cried the officers. "This woman knows the sculptor, we are sure, though she will not tell his name." Leona was questioned but remained silent. They explained the penalty for her behavior, but her lips stayed closed. Then Pericles said, "The law is imperative, and I am the minister of the law. Take the girl to prison." While he was still speaking, a young man with scattered hair, emaciated but with eyes as bright as the flashing light of genius, rushed forward and, throwing himself at his feet, exclaimed, "Oh, Pericles, forgive and save the young girl. She is my sister. I am the guilty one. The group is the work of my hands, the hands of a slave." The outraged crowd interrupted him and shouted, to prison with the slave." "In my life," said Pericles, standing up, "look at this group. Apollo decides with it that there is something higher in Greece than an unjust law. The highest goal of the law must develop from the beautiful. If Athens lives in the memory and effect of men, it is its devotion to art that immortalizes it. No to prison, but to my side. Bring the youth." There, in front of the gathered crowd, Aspasia placed the olive crown she was holding on Creon's forehead, and at the same time, under universal applause, kissed Creon's affectionate and devoted sister. The Athenians erected a statue of Leopold Aesop, born a slave, so that men would know that the path to honor is open to all in Greece. Wealth and immortality with a certain reward for anyone who could distinguish themselves in art, literature, or war. No other country has done as much to encourage and inspire merit. "The struggle arises in poverty," said Vice President Henry Wilson. "Misery was by my cradle. I know very well what it is to ask a mother for bread when she has nothing to give. I left my home at the age of 10 and worked as an apprentice for 11 years, receiving 1 month of school each year. After 11 years of hard work, I earned a pair of oxen and 6 sheep that gave me $84. I never spent a single dollar for pleasure, counting every penny from my birth until I was 21. I know what it is to travel long distances and ask others for permission to work. During the first month after I turned 21, I went to the woods, drove a team and cut logs for a mill. I got up in the morning before dawn and worked hard until dusk, receiving the magnificent sum of $6 for a month of work. Each of those dollars seemed as big as the moon we see tonight. Mr. Wilson was determined to never miss an opportunity to educate himself or progress. Few men knew the value of free time as well as he did, which he treated as if it were gold, and he never let any moment pass without extracting all the value possible. He managed to read 1,000 good books before the age of 21. What a lesson for farm boys. Leaving the farm, he traveled from Natick, Massachusetts, over 100 miles away, to learn the trade of a shoemaker. He passed through Boston to see the Bunker Hill Monument and other historical sites. The entire journey cost him $1.06. After a year, he was the director of a debate club in Natick. Before 8 years had passed, he gave his speech against slavery at the Massachusetts legislature. 12 years later, he found himself associating with the refined summer at Congress. Every opportunity was a great occasion. He turned every circumstance in his life into material for success. "Stop walking around town in this extravagant outfit. Let me give you instructions on what to wear in the shop. Dress a bit more appropriately." Grilly looked at his clothes as though he had never realized how shabby they were, and continued, "Look, gentlemen, my father is in a new place, and I want to help him as much as possible." He had spent only $6 for his personal needs over 7 months and was due to receive $135 from Judge J.M. Stirrett of the Rye Gazette for some replacement work. He kept only $15 and gave the rest to his father, with whom he had moved to Vermont west of Pennsylvania, and for whom he had camped many nights to protect the sheep from wolves. He was around 21 years old, and although he was tall and gangly, with mouse-colored hair, a pale face, and a plaintive voice, he decided to seek his fortune in New York, carrying his bundle of clothes on a stick over his shoulder. He traveled 60 miles through forest to Buffalo, took a canal boat to Albany, then a barge down the Hudson, and arrived in New York at sunrise. It was August 18th, 1831. He found lodging in a boarding house at $2.50 a week. His 600-mile journey had cost him only $5. For days and hours he wandered the streets, entering dozens of buildings and asking if they needed a hand, but always facing rejection. His picturesque appearance made many think he was a runaway apprentice. One Sunday at his boarding house, he learned that printers were needed at the West Printing Press. He showed up at the door at 5 a.m. on Monday and asked the foreman for a job. By 6 a.m., The foreman, not knowing that a novice could type the polyglot will for which help was needed, said, "Get him a case, and don't worry, prepare him a box and we'll see if he can do anything." When the owner arrived, he objected to the newcomer and told the foreman to let him go once his first day of work was finished. That night, he showed a proof of the most important and accurate job done in 10 years. He became associated with a small printing press and founded the New Yorker, the best weekly in the United States, but it was not profitable. When Harrison was elected president in 1840, Greeley founded the Lockervin, which then had a fabulous circulation of 90,000 copies, but with this newspaper priced at 1 cent per issue, he still didn't make any money. His next venture was Daniel, with a 1 cent price to start. He borrowed $1,000 and printed 5 copies of the first issue. It was difficult to distribute them all. He began with 600 subscribers and increased the list to 11,000 in 6 weeks. The demand from the court grew faster than the acquisition of new machines to print it. It was a newspaper whose editor, despite his mistakes, always tried to be right. James Gordon Bennett had failed with his New York Courier in 1825, with the glove in 1832, and with the pencil Bain shortly after, and was known only as a clever writer for the press, having saved only a few $100s through hard work and strict economy for 14 years. In 1835, he asked Howard Greeley to join him in founding a new newspaper, the New York Herald. Greeley refused but recommended 2 young printers who teamed up with Bennett and Gerard. On May 6, 1835, the cash capital to cover expenses was set up. For 10 days, Benedict rented a small basement on Wall Street. He furnished it with a chair and a desk made from a board placed on 2 barrels. There, doing all the work except printing, he began creating a true great newspaper, something unknown in America at the time, as all its predecessors had been party organs. The young man strove to reach his ideal by providing fresh and clear news from an increasingly broad area, until his newspaper became famous for providing world news as completely and quickly as any competitor, and always more completely and quickly. No effort or expense was spared to obtain fast and reliable information on any subject of general interest. It was hard work, but its culmination was marked by the opening, at the corner of Broadway and Ann Street, of the most complete journalistic establishment then known. One of the first things that caught attention upon entering George White's private office in Philadelphia was the slogan, which was the key to the success of a young man who had started with no opportunities. His primary ambition was to own the Philadelphia Ledger and the grand building in which it was published. But how could a poor boy working for $2 a week hope to own such a large newspaper? However, he had great determination and indomitable energy. As soon as he had saved a few $100s working in a bookstore, he embarked on the profession as an editor, achieving great success with some of the works published, such as Kane's Arctic Expedition. He had a keen sense of what would appeal to the public, and seemed never to lack zeal. Despite the daily financial losses of the Ledger, his friends could not dissuade him from buying it, and in 1864 his childhood dreams came true. He doubled the subscription price, raised advertising rates to everyone's astonishment, and the newspaper began a prosperous career, with profits generally exceeding $400,000 per year. He always refused to cut his employees' wages, even though all the other establishments in Philadelphia did so. At a banquet held in Lyon nearly a century and a half ago, a discussion arose about the meaning of a painting representing a scene from Greek mythology or history. Seeing the discussion heating up, the host addressed one of the boys and asked him for an explanation of the painting. To the great surprise of the guests, the boy gave such a clear and concise explanation that the whole subject was convincing and immediately resolved the dispute. "In which school did you study, sir?" asked one of the guests, addressing the boy with great respect. "I studied in many schools, my lord," replied the young servant, "but the school where I studied the most and learned the most is the school of adversity. I have greatly benefited from the lessons of poverty." Although he was poor at the time, soon all of Europe resounded with the fame of the writings of the greatest of his time and his country, Jean Hus. The soft sandy beach of Lake Erie was the piece of paper on which, lacking other materials, P.R. Spencer, a barefoot young man with no prospects, perfected the essential principles of the Spencerian system of penmanship, the finest display of graphic art. For 8 years, William Cobbett had followed the plough. When he escaped to London, he copied legal documents for 8 or 9 months, then enlisted in an infantry regiment. During his first year as a soldier, he subscribed to a library in Satan, where he read all the available books. Thus, he began studying. I learned grammar while I was a rank-and-file soldier with a salary of 6 pennies a day. The edge of my bunk or the sentry's bed was my seat for studying, my backpack served as my library, and a piece of board on my knees was my writing desk. The task required nothing compared to a year of my life. I had no money to buy candles or oil, and in winter it was rare to have any light at night, other than that from the fire. To buy a pen or a sheet of paper, I had to give up part of my food. Even in a state of semi-starvation, I never had a moment I could call my own and had to read and write amid the conversations, laughter, singing, whistling and shouting of at least 20 of the most undelicate men during the hours when they were free from all control. Let's not forget the penny I sometimes had to give for the pen, ink, or paper. That penny was, unfortunately, a large sum for me. I was as tall as I am now, and I had good health and a lot of exercise. All the money I didn't spend on us at the market was 2 pennies a week for each man, and although I remember once, after all the absolutely necessary expenses, I had managed to set aside a halfpenny I had planned for a small pleasure in the morning, but being so hungry that I could hardly bear life, when I undressed in the evening, I found that I had lost my halfpenny. I buried my head in the miserable blanket and rug, crying like a child. But Covet made sure that even his poverty and harsh circumstances served his absorbing passion for knowledge and success. If, I say, in these circumstances, I was able to find and overcome this task, there exists and can exist throughout the world a youth who finds an excuse for their lack of achievement. He had only a small opportunity to acquire great scientific knowledge, but he possessed a true temperament, making even old pots, teapots, and bottles contribute to his success, while experimenting and studying in the attic of the pharmacy where he worked. Many farmers' sons, said Zerdo With, found the best opportunities for mental improvement during their leisure time while taking care of the sap bushes. This was, in any case, my own experience. At night, there was nothing to do but feed the boilers and keep the fire, as the sap was collected and the wood cut before nightfall. During the day, we always had a good supply of large pines, whose burning light in front of the sugar house provided me with many delightful nights of reading. I remember that this is how I acquired a history of the French Revolution and gained a deeper and more lasting knowledge of its events and horrors, and the actors of this great national tragedy, than all my later readings. I was very grateful to be able to borrow books from a certain Kiss after a 2-mile walk in the snow with my feet wrapped in pieces of carpet. "Can I have a vacation tomorrow, Father?" he asked Uncle Dora Parker. One August afternoon, the poor mill builder from Exeter looked with surprise at his youngest son. It was a time of much work, but he noticed on the serious face of the boy that he did not have an ordinary goal in mind and accepted his request. He got up very early the next morning, walked through the dust for 10 miles to Harvard College, and presented himself as a candidate for admission. He had not been able to attend school regularly since the age of 8, but he had managed to go for 3 months every winter and had reviewed his lessons over and over again while following the furrow or working on other tasks. All his free moments had been devoted to reading useful books that he borrowed. A book that he couldn't borrow, he felt he had to have. Thus, on summer mornings, he got up well before the sun and picked bushel after bushel of berries that he sent to Boston to get money and buy that precious Latin dictionary. "Well done, my son," said the miller when his son came home late at night and announced that he had passed the exam. "But Theodore, I can't afford to keep you there." "That's true, Father," replied Theodore. "I'm not going to stay there. I will study at home intermittently and prepare for a final exam that will give me a degree." And so he did, and by teaching at school as he grew, he earned the money needed to study for 2 years at Harvard, where he graduated with honors. Years later, as a friend and trusted advisor to Seward, Chase, Sumner, Garrison, Horace Mann, and Wendell Phillips, his influence for good was felt in the hearts of all his fellow citizens. It was a pleasure for him to remember his early struggles and triumphs among the rocks and bushes of success. "The proudest moment of my life," said Elite, "was when I understood the full meaning of the first 15 lines of Homer's Iliad. Eliud's father died when he was 16, and Helio became an apprentice blacksmith in his hometown of New Brine, Connecticut. He had to work at the forge for 10 or 12 hours a day, but while blowing the bellows, he solved arithmetic problems as complicated as those in a journal kept in Engorchester. where he went a few years later to take advantage of the privileges of his library. There were notes like these: Monday, June 18th, headache, 40 pages of Cuvier's Theory of the Earth, 64 pages in French, 11 hours of forging. Tuesday, June 19th, 60 lines in Hebrew, 30 in Danish, 10 in Bohemian, 9 in Polish, 15 names of stars, 10 hours of forging. Wednesday, June 20th, 25 lines in Hebrew, 8 lines from Tiriaco, 11 hours of forging. He mastered 18 languages and 32 dialects, became prominent as a learned blacksmith, and for his remarkable work in the service of humanity. Edward says that the morning when this young man without opportunities acquired a great education, it is enough to make anyone with good educational opportunities blush. The shoeless Christine Nilsson in faraway Sweden had few chances, but she won the admiration of the world for her marvelous vocal talent combined with rare feminine grace. "Let me say regarding worldly adverse circumstances," said the doctor to the youth, "that you are now at the level of those who will eventually succeed. Remember my words and think of them in 30 years. You will discover that those who are millionaires in this country at that time, those who are the orators of the country, the poets of the country, the great merchants of the country, the great philanthropists of the country, the highest in the church and state, are now at your level, not an inch above you, and in circumstances straitened, without equipment or capital to start. Young man, go down to the library, take some books and read about the wonderful mechanism that God has given you in your hand, in your foot, in your eye, in your ear. Then ask a doctor to take you to the dissection room and illustrate to you what you have read, and never again commit the blasphemy of saying you don't have capital to start equipped. The poorest young man is equipped in the way that the God of all the universe could afford to equip him. A newsboy is not a very promising candidate for success or honor in any path of life. A young person cannot start their life with much less chance than when they begin their daily routine to earn a living. However, the one who is more than anyone else responsible for the industrial regeneration of this continent began his life as a newspaper seller on the Grand Trunk Railway. Thomas Alva Edison was about 15 years old at the time. He had started exploring chemistry and had set up a small traveling laboratory. One day, while conducting an experiment in secret, the train took a turn and the sulfuric acid bottle broke, causing a series of supernatural smells and unnatural complications. The conductor, having endured long and patiently, quickly expelled the young man, and in the process gave Edison a sound slap. Edison went through a series of dramatic situations, always mastering them, until he reached, at an early age, the scientific throne of the world. When he was recently asked what the secret of his success was, he replied that he had always been a total abstainer and moderate in everything except his work. Daniel Manning, who was the first campaign manager for President Cleveland and later Secretary of the Treasury, started out as a newspaper distributor. Apparently the world was against him, just as it was for Zerlowick and David. New York seems to have been prolific when it came to young entrepreneurial newspaper boys. How absurd it was that two young unknowns and uneducated, meeting in a cheap boarding house in Boston, stood up against an institution whose roots were deeply embedded in the very constitution of our country, defined by scholars, politicians, churches, and people of high society, regardless of creed or politics. What chances did they have against the prejudices and sentiments of a nation? But they were driven by a noble purpose and did so with all the gravity possible. One of them, Benjamin Landy, had already launched a newspaper called The Spirit of Universal Liberty in Ohio and had carried the entire edition home from the printing press, 20 miles each month. He had traveled 400 miles to Tennessee to increase his subscriber list. This was no ordinary young man. Together with William Lloyd Garrison, he continued his work with Massachusetts Inco in Baltimore. The sight of slave pens along the main streets, ships loaded with unfortunate souls ripped from their homes and families and sent to southern ports, the heartbreaking auction scenes marked Garrison in a way he would never forget. And the young man, whose mother was so poor that she sent him to school, although she had taught him from a young age to hate oppression, resolved to dedicate his life to securing the freedom of these unfortunate souls. In the first issue of his newspaper, Garrison called for immediate emancipation and brought down the anger of the entire community, being arrested and sent to prison. John G. Walter, a noble Northern friend, was so moved by the news that he, in his extreme poverty, sought to provide the necessary money, and wrote to Henry, pleading for Garrison's release by paying the fine. After 49 days of detention, he was freed. Wendell Phillips said of him, "He was imprisoned for his opinion." At 24 years old, he had confronted a nation in the prime of his youth, in Boston, with no money, friends, or influence. In a small room upstairs, Garrison launched The Liberator. Read the statement of this poor young man with no opportunities in the first issue. "I will be as hard as truth and as unyielding as justice. I say this with all seriousness. I will not err. I will not excuse myself. I will not back down an inch, and I will be heard." What audacity for a young man who has the world against him. The Honorable Robert and Jane of South Carolina wrote to Otis, mayor of Boston, telling him that someone had sent him a copy of The Liberator and asking him to find out the name of the editor. Otis responded that he had found a poor young man printing this modest pamphlet in a dark hole. His only assistant was a young black man, and his supporters were a few people of all colors and limited influence. But this poor young man, eating, sleeping, and printing in that dark hole, had made the world think, thus necessitating his removal. The South Carolina Vigilance Association offered a reward of $1,500 for the arrest and prosecution of anyone found distributing The Liberator. The governors of 1 or 2 states put a price and a reward on the head of the editor. The Georgia legislature offered a reward of $5,000 for his arrest and conviction. Garrison and his collaborators were denounced everywhere. A clerk named Lovejoy was murdered by a mob in Illinois for supporting the cause while defending his printing press. And in the old cradle of American liberty, the wealth, power, and culture of Massachusetts rose against the abolitionists in such a scandalous manner that a mere bystander, a young lawyer full of promise, called for them to be raised to a high platform and answered with a speech like none ever heard at the time. When the night exposed the principles that put Lovejoy's killers in Alton, alongside Otis and Hancock with 15 and Adams, Wendell Phillips, pointing to their portraits on the walls, thought that those painted lips must have exclaimed to rebuke the recreated American, the slanderer of the dead by the sentiments expressed in a sacred place by the prayers of the Puritans and the blood of the patriots. The earth should have opened up and swallowed them. The whole nation was in turmoil between the Northern pioneers and the Southern cavalry. The struggle was long and fierce. Even in faraway California, the drama culminated with the clash of the Civil War. When the war ended, after 35 years of unyielding and heroic conflict, Garrison was sent by President Lincoln to see how the stars and stripes were once again displayed over Ford's Theater, an emancipated slave who gave the welcoming speech. His 2 daughters, now regarded as human beings rather than chattel, presented Garrison with a magnificent flower crown. About the same time, Richard, another powerful friend of the oppressed, died in London. His father had passed away, leaving 9 children almost penniless. The child earned his living by tending a neighbor's sheep, without having the chance to attend school until the age of 10. He was sent to a boarding school where he was mistreated, left half-starved, and could only write home once every 3 weeks. At 15, he became an apprentice in his uncle's shop in London. He learned French by waking up early and studying while his peers slept. He was soon sent as a commercial representative. He called on John Bright for help to fight the terrible corn laws that deprived the poor of bread to give it to the rich. He found Mr. Bryan very saddened because his wife had died at their home. "There are thousands of homes on earth right now," said Richard Golden, "where wives, mothers, and children are dying of hunger. Now, when the first paroxysm of pain has passed, I advise you to come with me, for we will not rest until the corvée is abolished." He could no longer see the poor man's plan halted at customs and registered for the benefit of the landowner and farmer, so he invested his whole soul in this great reform. "It is not a matter of parties," he said, "for men from all parties are united in this cause. It is a matter of livelihood, an issue between the millions of workers and the aristocracy." They formed the League Against the Corn Law, which, with the help of the Irish famine, for it was hunger that finally broke the stone walls of protection, succeeded in the repeal of the law in 1846. Mr. Bright declared that there was no poor man's home in Britain that did not benefit from a larger, better, and cheaper loaf of bread thanks to the efforts of Richard Golden. John Bright himself was the son of a poor worker. At that time, the doors of higher schools were closed to people like him, But the great Quaker heart of this resolute young man was moved by the millions of poor people in England and Ireland dying of hunger under the Corn Laws during the terrible famine that left 2 million Irish dead in 1 year. John Bright was more powerful than all the nobility of England combined. All the aristocracy trembled before his invincible logic, his powerful eloquence, and his imposing character. Except for Golden, no other man did more to offer workers a shorter day, cheaper bread, and a little more money. In a stable in London lived a very poor young man named Michael Faraday, who delivered newspapers on the streets for a penny each. He was apprenticed for 7 years to a binder and bookseller. While binding the Encyclopaedia Britannica, his eyes were fixed on the article about electricity, and he could not rest until he had read it. He obtained a glass bulb, an old pan, and a few simple items with which he began to experiment. A client took an interest in the young man and took him to listen to a lecture on chemistry. Faraday gathered the courage to write to the great scientist and sent him the notes he had taken from the lecture. One night, shortly afterward, just as Michael was about to retire, Sir Humphrey's carriage stopped in front of his humble lodging, and a servant handed him a written invitation to visit the great lecturer the next morning. Michael could hardly believe his eyes when reading the note. The next morning, he went to the indicated place and took care of cleaning the instruments and transporting them to the lecture hall. He watched David closely as he developed his safety lamp with a glass mask on his face and experimented with dangerous explosives. Michael also studied and experimented. It didn't take long before this poor boy with no prospects was invited to give a lecture in front of the great Philosophical Society. He was appointed professor at the Royal Academy of Greenwich and became the wonder of his time in science. Tilden said of him that he was the greatest experimental philosopher the world had ever seen. When asked what his greatest discovery was, he replied that it was Michael Faraday. What had been done can be done again, he said. This hopeless young man, a Jew who became Lord Beaconsfield, the great Prime Minister of England, was neither a slave nor a captive, and with energy he overcame even greater obstacles. The Jewish blood ran in his veins and everything seemed against him, but he remembered the example of Joseph, who became the Prime Minister of Egypt 4,000 years earlier, and Daniel, who was Prime Minister to the world's greatest despot 5 centuries before Christ's birth. He made his way through the lower, middle, and upper classes until he rose, self-appointed, to the top of political and social power, rejected, despised, ridiculed, and mistreated in the House of Commons. He simply said, "The time will come when I will be heard." That time came, and this young man, with no resources but with willpower and life, imposed himself at the heart of England for a quarter of a century. Henry Clay, the mill boy, was one of 7 children of a widow so poor that she couldn't send him to any school but the ordinary rural school where only the 3 R's were taught. But he took advantage of every free moment to study without a teacher, and later became a king among self-made men, a boy who had learned to speak in a barn with a cow and a horse as his audience, and he became one of America's greatest orators and statesmen. See Kepler fighting against poverty and difficulties, his books burned publicly by order of the state, his library confiscated by the Jesuits, and he himself exiled by public clamor. For 17 years, he worked peacefully to demonstrate the great principles that planets describe ellipses with the sun at one focus, that a line connecting the center of the Earth to the center of the sun sweeps equal areas in equal times, and that the squares of the planet's revolution times around the sun are proportional to the cubes of their average distances from the sun. This hopeless young man became one of the world's greatest astronomers. "When I discovered that I was black," said Alexandre Dumas, "I decided to live as if I were white, and thus force people to look beyond my skin." What seemed to be the humble prospect of James Charles, the famous English blacksmith, was very modest, but he always got up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to copy books he couldn't afford. He walked 18 miles to Manchester and back, after a hard day's work, to buy a penny's worth of artist materials. He always took the heaviest work at the forge because it took longer to heat, which gave him many free moments to study. The precious book he held against the fireplace was a great treasure for him, and he made use of every free moment as if he would never see another. He dedicated his leisure hours for 5 years to this wonderful work, the forge, of which copies are now visible in many homes. What chance did Galileo have of gaining fame in physics or astronomy when his parents forced him to attend medical school? However, while Venice slept, He was in the tower of the San Marco Cathedral and discovered the satellites of Jupiter and the phases of Venus using a telescope he had made with his own hands. When he was forced to publicly renounce his heretical doctrine that the earth revolves around the sun, none of the terrors of the Inquisition could stop this 60-year-old weak man from murmuring to himself, "Nevertheless, it moves." When he was imprisoned, his desire for scientific research was so great that he demonstrated with a straw in his cell that it is relatively stronger than a solid rod of the same size. Even when completely blind, he continued to work diligently. Imagine the surprise of the Royal Society of England when the poor and unknown Herschel sent in the report of his discovery of the star George Sidus, its orbit and speed, the rings and satellites of Saturn. This young man, with no prospects, who had played the oboe to feed himself, had made the telescope through which he discovered facts unknown to the best-equipped astronomers of his time. He had collected 200 mirrors before he succeeded in obtaining a perfect one. George Stephenson was one of 8 children whose parents were so poor they all lived in a single room. He had to tend to a neighbor's cows, but he always managed to find time to make a clay engine with hemlock sticks for tubes. At 17, he worked on an engine with his father, a fireman. He didn't know how to read or write, but the machine was his mistress, and he was a diligent student. While others spent their holidays playing or carousing in taverns, George spent his time dismantling his machine, cleaning it, studying it, and experimenting with engines. When he became famous for his great inventions in engine improvements, those who had wasted their time playing treated him as lucky, without outward charm or appearance. Charlotte decided to step forward as an actress, even in roles like Rosalind and Queen Catherine. The lead actress was unable to perform, and Miss Cushman, her replacement, took her place. That night, Miss Cushman captivated the audience with such mastery of intelligence and a will of iron that they forgot the absence of the simple, feminine grace like Dimples. Though poor, friendless, and unknown before, when the curtain fell on her first performance in the London theatre, her reputation was already established. Years later, when doctors told her she had a terrible and incurable illness, she was not at all disturbed and calmly said that she had learned to live with her problem. A poor woman of colour lived in a wooden cabin in the South. She had 3 children, but could only afford 1 pair of pants for all 3. So eager was she to give them an education that she sent them to school alternately. The teacher, a young girl from the north, noticed that each child only went to school every 3rd day, and that they all wore the same pair of pants. The poor mother educated her children as best she could. One of them became a professor at a university in the South, another became a doctor, and the third became a clerk. What a lesson for young people who claim to lack opportunities as an excuse to squander their lives. Cunard, the young Scottish sculptor from Glasgow, made many strange inventions with his brain and knife, but they brought him neither honour nor profit until he was consulted by Barnes McKeeboard, who was interested in expanding his facilities for foreign mail transport. The steamship model Sam developed for them was carefully copied for the first ship of the great Cunard line and became the standard type for all the magnificent ships built by the company since. The New Testament and spelling were the only books Cornelius Vanderbilt had at school, but he learned to read, write, and do a little arithmetic. He desired to buy a boat, despite having no money. To discourage him from pursuing his passion for the sea, his mother told him that if he ploughed, raked, and planted corn before the 27th of the month on 10 acres of rough, hard, and stony land, the worst part of his father's farm, she would lend him the amount he wanted. Before the deadline, the work was completed and very well done. On his 17th birthday, he bought the boat, but on his way home, he hit a sandbank and sank. When he reached shallow waters, Cornelius Vanderbilt was not a boy to give up easily. He started again, and within 3 years he saved $3,000, working nearly all night and soon gaining the greatest patronage among all the boatmen in the harbour. During the War of 1812, he secured the government contract to supply provisions to the military stations near the metropolis. He fulfilled his contract at night so that he could ferry between New York and Brooklyn during the day. The young man, who gave his parents everything he earned by day, kept half of what he made at night. By the time he was 35, he was worth $30,000, and when he died in old age, he left one of the largest fortunes in America to his 3 children. Lord Elton might have claimed that he had no luck when he was a child, being too poor to go to school or even buy books. But he had courage and determination, He was resolved to make his place in the world. He woke up at 4 in the morning and copied law books he borrowed, including the bulky Sur Litello. He had such a thirst for learning that he sometimes studied until his brain refused to work. He tied a wet towel around his head to stay awake and study. During his first year of practice, he earned only 9 shillings, but he was determined to keep going. When Elton left the room, the prosecutor patted him on the shoulder and said, "Young man, your bread and butter are assured for life." The young man with no future became Lord Chancellor of England and then one of the best lawyers of his time. Stephen Girard had no chances. He left his home in France at the age of 10 and arrived in America as a cabin boy. His great ambition was to succeed at any cost. No job, no matter how hard or unpleasant, was too much for him. Like Midas, he turned everything he touched into gold and became one of the wealthiest merchants in Philadelphia. His strange love for money is not to be praised, but his meticulousness in everything he did, his public spirit in times of national need, and his willingness to risk his life to save 6 strangers from the terrible yellow fever are traits worthy of imitation. John Wanamaker walked 4 miles to Philadelphia every day and worked in a bookstore for $1.25 per week. He then worked in a clothing store with an advance of 25 cents per week. Afterward, he climbed the ranks and became one of the greatest merchants alive. In 1889, President Harrison appointed him Postmaster General, where he demonstrated immense executive ability. The prejudices against her race and gender did not prevent the young woman of color, Edmonia Lewis, from fighting for honor and fame as a sculptor. Frederick Douglass started his life with nothing, not even control of his own body, and was pledged before his birth to pay off his master's debts. To reach the level of the poorest young white boy, he had to climb as much distance as that boy to become President of the United States. He saw his mother only 2 or 3 times, when she walked seeds at night to be with him for an hour, returning in time to go back to the fields at dawn. He was not lucky enough to study, had no teacher, and the plantation rules forbade slaves from learning to read and write. But somehow, without his master noticing, he learned the alphabet using scraps of paper and medical almanacs, and from then on, his career knew no limits. He shamed thousands of white children, escaped slavery at 21, went north, and worked as a stevedore in New York and New Bedford. In Nantucket, he had the chance to speak at an anti-slavery meeting and made such a favorable impression that he was made agent for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. While traveling from place to place to give lectures, he studied with all his might. He was sent to Europe to give talks and made friends with several English people who gave him $750, which he used to buy his freedom. He published a journal in Rochester, New York, and then ran the New Era in Washington for several years. He was Marshal of the District of Columbia. Henry and Dixie, the well-known actor, began his stage career in the modest back part of a cow. Pitty Burnham rode a horse for 10 cents a day. He was a child born in a wooden cabin, without studies, books, teachers, or ordinary opportunities. He won the admiration of humanity for his practical wisdom and craftsmanship. During our Civil War, he was the one who emancipated 4 million slaves. See this young man, tall, thin, and awkward, cutting trees on his small property, building his own wooden cabin with no floor or windows, studying arithmetic and grammar by the light of the fireplace at night. In his desire to understand Blackstone's commentaries, he walked 44 miles to get the precious volumes and read 100 pages on the way back. Abraham Lincoln inherited no opportunities and owed nothing to luck. His good fortune relied essentially on unyielding perseverance and a righteous heart. In another wooden cabin in the forests of Ohio, a poor widow holds an 18-month-old child in her arms and wonders if she will be able to protect her little ones from the dangers of wolves. The child grows, and in a few years he is found cutting wood and clearing the small forest glade to help his mother during every spare moment. Peace is studied with books he borrows but cannot buy. At 16, he eagerly accepts the opportunity to drive mules on the canal towpath. He immediately asks for a chance to sweep the floor and ring the bell at an academy to pay his fees while studying there. His first class at Guegua Seminary cost him only $17. When he returned for the next term, he had only 16 pennies in his pocket, which he placed in the church contribution box. The next day, he contracted food, laundry, fuel, and light from a carpenter for $1.06 per week, with the benefit of working nights and Saturdays as much as he could. One Saturday, he received 51 boards for which he was paid $1.02. When the term ended, he had paid all his fees and still had $3 left. The following winter, he taught school for $12 a month, and by spring, he had $48. When he returned to school, his lodging cost him 31 cents a week. He was soon at Williams College, where in 2 years he graduated with honors. He entered the state senate at 26 and Congress at 33. 27 years after asking for the opportunity to ring the bell at Hiram College, James A. Garfield became President of the United States. The inspiration of this example is worth more for the youth of America than all the wealth of Astor, Vanderbilt, and Gould. Among the greatest heroes and benefactors of the world, there are many others whose cradles were rocked by necessity in humble cabins, and who faced the waves of destiny, relying only on God's mercy and their own energies. The little grey cabin seems to be the birthplace of all these great men, says an English author who had gone through a book of biographies of prominent Americans. With 5 opportunities in each hand and an unwavering purpose, no young person, no matter how poor, should despair. There is bread and success for every young person under the American flag who has the energy and ability to seize their opportunity. It does not matter whether the boy is born in a log cabin or in a fine home. If he is driven by a determined purpose and maintains himself, neither men nor demons can stop him. The Napoleonic Wars so drained the innate virility of the French that even today, the average physical size of the French is almost half an inch smaller than it was at the start of Napoleon's reign. Rural America today constantly pays a similar tribute to the city by sacrificing its best blood, its finest minds, the finest physical and mental fibers in the world. This great current of magnificent rural virility that continually flows into the city easily deteriorates under the softening influences and contrasts of urban life, until superior virility, resilience, and robust qualities are completely lost within 2 or 3 generations of urban life. Our urban civilization is always in decline, and within a few generations, it would masculinize and effeminize if it weren't for the pure, crystalline flow of rural youth that continually purifies the muddy, weakened stream of urban life. Without this, it would quickly become as filthy and degenerate, threatening the physical and moral health of city dwellers. One of our great men says that one of the most unfortunate phases of modern civilization is the detachment from the farm, the drift of rural youth toward the city, which exerts a fascinating attraction. To him, the city seems to be the dream of opportunities, power, and pleasure, while the rural environment appears banal and vulgar after the first dream of the city. He cannot rid himself of this fascination until he has experienced its emptiness. He cannot understand the value of the rural environment and appreciate the glory of its disadvantages and opportunities without having seen the farce and superficiality of the city. One of the greatest blessings a human being can receive is to be born on a farm and grow up in the countryside. Self-confidence and courage are always the most important traits of rural life. The young person from the countryside is always compelled to rely on their own resources and think for themselves, which brings out their genius and inventiveness. They develop better general judgment and a more balanced head than the young person from the city. Their muscles are harder, their flesh firmer, and their brain fibers superior. The same granite hills, mountains, valleys, streams, and the miracle of growing crops record at every moment their powerful properties in construction, forging their blood, resilience, and character, all of which will make them giants when they compete with the youth raised in the city. The robust, vigorous, and resilient qualities, tenacity, muscular strength, and courage that characterize the men who accomplish great things in this world are generally cultivated in the countryside. If strength does not come from the land, it certainly comes from its surroundings. There seems to be a close relationship between robust character and the land, hills, mountains, valleys, pure air, and the sun. There is a significant difference between the physical endurance, mental vigor, solidity, and reliability of those raised in the countryside and those raised in the city. The average young person raised in the countryside has a better foundation for success. They possess more courage and moral resilience. They have not been weakened or softened by the superficial and decorative influences of urban life, and there is a reason for this. We are largely the reflection of our environment. We are under the perpetual influence of the suggestions of our surroundings. The young person raised in the city sees almost nothing else but human faces and forms. Almost everything presented to them from morning to night is artificial, created by man. They see almost nothing that has been made by God, which confers solidity, strength, and power like the natural objects of the countryside. How can a man build solid and substantial character when his eyes and ears are only presented with artificial sights and sounds? A vast ocean of commercial blocks, skyscrapers, and asphalted sidewalks does not provide the material necessary to build character, just as sculpture pushed to the extreme always weakens columns and beams, thus threatening the safety of the structure. Similarly, rural children, when brought to the city, are always excessively sculpted and decorated at the expense of their resilience, robustness, and vitality. In other words, virility, tenacity, physical and mental resilience reach their peak in those who live close to the land. When man adopts artificial conditions in his life, he begins to deteriorate and weaken. Much of what is called the best society in our cities is in an advanced state of decline. Muscles may be a little more delicate, but paradoxically, they are softer. The skin may be a little tighter, but it is less healthy. Thinking may be a little more flexible, but it is less vigorous. The entire trend of life in large cities is toward decline. City dwellers rarely live a normal life. It is unnatural for human beings to live far from the land. It is Mother Earth and life in the countryside that bring vitality, resilience, courage, and all the qualities that form virility and femininity. What we get from the countryside is solid, substantial, durable, and reliable. What comes from the artificial conditions of the city is only weakening, enervating, and fleeting. The young person from the countryside, on the other hand, is immersed in a perpetual miracle. They cannot open their eyes without seeing a spectacle more magnificent than what Raphael or Michelangelo could have created in their entire lives. And this magnificent panorama transforms at every moment, in every blade of grass and every flower that grows. A miracle is constantly occurring. Is it not wonderful to observe the chemical processes in nature's laboratory, mixing and diffusing the world with the beautiful colors and wonderful scents of the rose and the wildflower? No city child has been in such a wonderful childhood garden where perpetual creation unfolds in a vast multitude of diverse forms. The city youth has too many distractions. They are attracted by such a multiplicity of objects that they remain always superficial and lack depth. Their mind perpetually strays from the subject, and they lack continuity of thought and application. Their reading is superficial. They skim through many newspapers, magazines, and periodicals, but they don't really pay attention to any of them. Their afternoons are much more interrupted than those of the young person from the countryside, who, after a limited evening of entertainment, can read continuously for an entire afternoon on one subject. The rural youth may not read as many books as the city youth, but they always read them with much better results. The scarcity of large libraries, books, and periodicals is one of the reasons why rural youth make the best use of good books and articles, reading them over and over again. While the city youth, surrounded by newspapers and libraries, sees so many books that he often loses interest, the best literature is accessible to him without him truly absorbing its teachings. Indeed, the variety of attractions, distractions, temptations, and entertainments in the city is such that unless a young person is made of exceptional material, he will give in to the persuasion of the moment and take the path of least resistance. It is difficult for a young person raised in the city to resist the great variety of seductions and pleasures that demand his attention, to deny himself and ignore the calls of his peers while dedicating himself to self-improvement while others have fun. These exciting, entertaining, and tempting conditions of urban life do not foster the emergence of the great master goal, the single, unshakable, vital purpose that is always found in rural youth. The youth raised in the city also does not accumulate anything comparable to the accumulative reserve strength and resistance developed in the simple life of the land. On the other hand, the country boy is constantly developing his muscular system. His health is better, he gets more exercise, and has more time to think and reflect, making him less superficial than the city dweller. His perceptions are not as quick. He is not as agile in his movements. His mental action is slower and less brilliant, but overall, better balanced. He has been forced to carry out a great variety of tasks, which has developed corresponding mental qualities. The hard work on the farm, the tasks we hated as children, the stones we despised, turn out to be the elements that educated us, developed our power, and made us practical. The farm is a great gymnasium, a magnificent school of manual training, the kindergarten of nature that constantly demands self-sufficiency and inventiveness from the youth. He must make the tools and toys that he cannot buy or acquire, make, operate, adjust, and repair all kinds of agricultural machines and tools. His ingenuity and inventiveness are continuously put to the test. If the plough or tillage breaks, it must be repaired on the spot, always and without the proper tools. This training develops instinctive courage, robust qualities of success, and transforms the young person into a man of great resources. It is rare for such a youth so well trained in self-sufficiency, so wonderfully endowed with physical and mental resistance, to acquire such preeminence without being highly sought after when he arrives in the city. It is surprising that he always stands out in times of great emergencies and crises. Just place a rural youth, full of resistance and self-sufficiency, next to a pale, weak, unresistant, and exhausted city youth, and it becomes clear that the rural youth is almost always a leader, running banks and large trading houses. Isn't this predictable? This superior resistance and mental caliber is what allows material to rise to the top in all vocations. He possesses a particular quality of superiority that comes from experiencing realities not found in the superficial conditions of the city. The invigorating oxygen, inhaled in deep breaths through great muscular effort, develops a greater lung power in the country youth than in the city youth, and his work in the open air tends to build a robust constitution. Ploughing, sowing, and mowing, all that is done on the farm builds dynamism and strength. His muscles are harder, his flesh firmer, and his brain fiber possesses the same superior quality. He is always accumulating strength, storing energy in his brain and muscles, which later can become powerful factors in shaping the nation's destiny or providing the necessary backbone to prevent the state ship from floundering on the reefs. This wonderful accumulated reserve power in the countryside will reveal itself in the banker, statesman, lawyer, merchant, or successful businessman. Self-confidence and courage are always the most important characteristics of rural life. The child of the country is constantly forced to rely on his own resources. He is led to think for himself, which stimulates his ingenuity and allows him to become self-sufficient and strong. It has been proven that the use of tools in our manual training schools develops the brain, strengthens deficient faculties, and reveals latent powers. The child raised on the farm benefits from the best manual training school in the world and is constantly required to plan and accomplish things, always using tools. This is one of the reasons why he often develops better general judgment and a more balanced mind compared to the city youth. It is human nature to overestimate the value of things that are out of our reach. People save money for years to go to Europe to visit great art centers and see famous masterpieces, while in reality they have never seen the magnificent paintings created by the divine artist and spread throughout the landscape, at sunset, in the glory of flowers and plant life, right before their eyes and at their doorstep. What perpetual inspiration, what wonders of beauty and colorful miracles unfold everywhere in nature, confronting us at every moment. We see them almost every day of our lives, and they become so common that they no longer even arouse our admiration. Think of the difference between what a Ruskin perceives in a landscape and the impression he transmits to his mind, and what an ordinary person perceives, someone with little or no imagination, whose aesthetic faculties are barely developed. We are immersed in a desert of mysteries and wonderful beauties before our eyes. Great miracles occur in the grass, flowers, and fruits. For example, what is the marvelous process of cultivation by nature? How, on the basis of concentrated sunlight and delicious juices, it produces boxes of exact size in the field, without any loss, leakage, or evaporation, without the noise of factories, without the pounding of boxes. Miracles are performed in a silent laboratory. Yet what wonders of skill, exquisiteness, and beauty! What question marks, what wonderful mysteries, what stimulants of ingenuity are always before the farmer, no matter what path he takes. Where do all these corns, wheat, fruits, and vegetables come from? It seems that there is no loss for the soil, and yet what wonderful development in all this life and more life, everywhere, all the time, chemical forces that produce miracles greater than those described in the 1001 Nights. The trees, streams, mountains, hills, valleys, sunsets, as well as the animals that grow on the farm, are all mysteries that lead to reflection and awe of the creative processes underway everywhere. In contrast, the delightful freedom of the countryside stands in sharp contrast to the narrow and superficial life of the city. Everything in the countryside tends to lead the child to think, to awaken his dormant powers, and to develop his latent and hidden strengths. All of this is so healthy and natural compared to the city youth who is tempted to turn night into day and lead an artificial life with no horizon. The very temptation in the city to extend the night is harmful to health. It dissipates resistance and weakens character. While the city youth wastes his precious energy capital in late hours searching for pleasures, almost always in dissipation, the country youth accumulates power and vitality, replenishing his physical strength with natural and refreshing sleep, far from the distracting influences and exhausting excitement of urban life. The country youth does not learn to judge people according to superficial criteria of wealth and social status. He is not imbued with shallow ideas. The great childhood garden of the farm teaches him sincerity, simplicity, and honesty. There was a time when a child who did not show genius or exceptional skill was sent to the farm, while the brilliant child was sent to university or the city to make a career. But today, we begin to see that man has neglected agriculture, considering it a mundane occupation, a means provided by nature to make a living, reserved for those who were not much more capable. Agriculture was seen by many as a degrading occupation, desirable only for those who lacked the intelligence and education to dedicate themselves to a profession or vocation considered refined. However, scientific advances have revealed previously unsuspected possibilities. We are beginning to understand that it takes a high level of skill and education to make the best use of the land. That quality talent is required. We are discovering that agriculture is a science as great as astronomy, and that ignorant men led a mediocre life on their farms simply because they did not know how to combine intelligence with the land. The science of agriculture is now being greatly valued and is increasingly seen as a noble vocation or worthy profession. Reflect on what it means to collaborate with the Creator to produce greater and more splendid products from the earth, to cooperate with this divine creative force, even to alter the size, beauty, and fragrance of flowers, expand, modify, and change the taste of fruits and vegetables according to our desires. Think about what it means to be a magician in the realm of plants, like Luther Burbank, changing colors, flavors, scents. Almost anything is possible when one knows enough and has the heart and sympathy to collaborate with nature's great creative force. Mr. Burbank claims that there will come a time when man will be able to be almost anything he wishes in the plant kingdom, to produce at will any hue or color, almost any flavor in any fruit. The size of all fruits, vegetables, and flowers is just a matter of sufficient understanding, and nature will give us almost everything when we know how to treat it with intelligence, wisdom, and sympathy. The history of great men shows that having too many advantages can be a disadvantage. Who can say what the consequences would have been if Lincoln had been born in New York and educated at Harvard? If he had grown up among great libraries and in an atmosphere of books, only a small part of which could provide even superficial knowledge, he would have felt such an insatiable thirst that he would have been driven to walk 20 miles to borrow Blackstone's commentaries and read 100 pages on the way back. What could there have been in that rugged frontier forest where this poor young man knew no one who knew anything about books to awaken his ambition and stimulate his self-education? Where did this desire come from to know the history of the men and women who founded a nation, to know the history of his country? Where did this passion to devour the dry statutes of Indiana come from, as a young woman would devour a love story? Where did this ambition to become someone in the world, to serve his country without selfish ambitions arise? If his father had been rich and well-educated instead of being a poor, illiterate man of generally vagrant character, it is unlikely that Lincoln would have become the powerful man we know today if he had not felt the imperious duty imposed on him by the bit of necessity that he exploited. Where would the motive that drove him to struggle for self-development have come from? If he had been born and educated in luxury, his character would probably have been soft and flaccid compared to what it actually was. In what annals of history can we find another example of someone born of such poor origins and raised in such a miserable environment who achieved such eminence? Imagine a child today so eager for education that he would walk 9 miles a day to attend a rough frontier school in a log cabin. What would today's urban youth, who won't even walk a few blocks to school, think of a young man who did what Lincoln did to overcome his obstacles and seize the opportunities where he was? One day, one night, one morning or noon, a busy hour, an opportune moment, a crack through which sublime achievements shine, a space where fate follows the flow, a balance between too late and too soon, ready for the blessing of the moment to pass in favor. Oh, how fortunate is the one who, knowing how to wait, also knows how to watch and work and stay on the broad bridge of life, alert at the front to seize the passing moment, great with destiny in the outstretched hand of opportunity when the great clock of fate strikes now. What is opportunity worth for a man who cannot use it? An unfertilized egg carried away by the waves of time into non-existence. George Eliot. The secret of success in life is for a man to be ready for his opportunity when it presents itself. There are no good opportunities for young people anymore, complained a young law student to Daniel Webster. There is always room at the top, replied the great statesman and lawyer. There are no opportunities in a country where thousands of poor children become rich, where newspaper boys enter Congress, and where people born in the lowest positions rise to the highest positions. The world is full of doors. All are opportunities for those who use them. But like the pilgrim from Wongyang in the castle of the giant's desperate prison, who had the key to liberation with him all the time but forgot it, we do not fully rely on our ability to progress in everything that is good for us. This is what has given so much success to both the weak and the strong. We rely too much on outside help and aim too high for things that are close. A lady from Baltimore lost a precious diamond bracelet at a ball and thought it had been stolen from her coat pocket. Years later, while cleaning the stairs at the Peabody Institute, she was thinking of ways to earn money to buy food. She cut up an old, worn and torn coat to make herself a hood. It was then that she found the diamond bracelet, worth $3,500, although she did not know it. Many who believe themselves to be poor are actually rich in opportunities. If only we could see them, these possibilities around us, in abilities that are worth far more than diamond bracelets. In our great cities in the East, it has been found that at least 94 out of 100 people found their first fortune at home or in their surroundings, by satisfying the common needs of each day. It is a regrettable day for a young person who cannot see any opportunities where he is, but thinks he could do better elsewhere. Brazilian pastors organized a group to go to California to seek gold, and took with them a few translucent pebbles to play checkers during the journey. Upon their arrival in San Francisco, after throwing most of the pebbles away, they discovered that they were diamonds. They hurried back to Brazil, but found that the mines from which they had been harvested had already been worked by other prospectors and sold to the government. The richest gold mine in Nevada had been sold by its owner for $42 to raise money to pay for his passage to other mines where he thought he would become rich. Professor Agassi once told Harvard students the story of a farmer who owned a farm with hundreds of acres of forest and unprofitable rocks and decided to sell it to start a more lucrative business. He chose to enter the coal and oil trade, studying coal measurements and deposits and experimenting for a long time. He sold his farm for $200 and moved 200 miles away to start his new business. Soon after, the man who bought his farm discovered a large quantity of coal and oil that the farmer had tried to drain, unaware that it was impossible. Hundreds of years ago, near the banks of the Indus River, there lived a Persian named Ali Japhet. He lived in a country house by the river, offering a magnificent view of the land that stretched to the sea. He had wives and children, a vast farm, fields of grain, flower gardens, orchards, and miles of forest. He was rich and had everything the heart could desire. He was content and happy. One night, a Buddhist priest visited him, and while sitting by the fire explained how the world had been created and how the first rays of sunlight had condensed on the earth's surface to become diamonds. The old priest told him that a drop of sunlight the size of his thumb was worth more than great mines of copper, silver, or gold, that with a single drop of sunlight one could buy many farms like his, that a few drops could buy a province, and that a diamond mine could buy a kingdom. Ali Japhet listened and stopped being a rich man. He was struck by discontent, and all his wealth faded away. The next morning, very early, he woke the priest who had caused his misfortune, and anxiously asked where he could find a diamond mine. "What do you want diamonds for?" asked the surprised priest. "I want to be rich and place my children on thrones," replied Ali Japhet. "All you have to do is go search until you find them," said the priest. "But where should I go?" asked the poor farmer. "Go anywhere, north, south, east, west," answered the priest. "How will I know when I've found the place?" "When you find a river flowing over white sands between high mountain ranges, there will be diamonds in those white sands," replied the priest. Discontented, he sold the farm for whatever he could get, left his family with a neighbor, took the money he had saved, and set off in search of the coveted treasure. He traveled through the mountains of Arabia, Palestine, and Egypt for many years, but found no diamonds. When his money ran out and hunger loomed, ashamed of his madness and rags, the poor Ali Japhet threw himself into the sea and drowned. The man who had bought the farm was a satisfied man who made the best of his environment and did not believe in seeking diamonds or success elsewhere. One day, while his camel drank from the garden, he noticed a glimmer in the white sands of the stream. He picked up a stone and, enchanted by its brilliant reflections, brought it back home, placed it on a shelf near the fireplace, and forgot about it. The old Buddhist priest, who had filled Ali Japhet with this fatal discontent, called on the new owner of the farm. As soon as he entered the room, his gaze caught the bright gleam of the stone. "Here is a diamond! Here is a diamond!" he exclaimed excitedly. "It's come back to Ali Japhet," said the farmer. "It's not a diamond, it's just a stone." They went into the garden and stirred the white sand with their fingers, finding more diamonds, even more beautiful than the first, sparkling in the sand. Thus the famous Golconda diamond mines were discovered. If Ali Japhet had been content to stay at home and dig in his own garden instead of going abroad in search of riches, he would have been one of the richest men in the world, for the entire farm was full of the most precious gems. You have your own place and special work. Find it and occupy it. It is unlikely that a child or teenager would have these lines, but they have a much better chance of succeeding than Garfield, Wilson, Franklin, Lincoln, Harry Francis Willard, and thousands of others. To succeed, you must be ready to seize and improve the opportunity when it presents itself. Remember 4 things that never come back: the spoken word, the arrow shot, the life spent, and the opportunity neglected. One of the paradoxes of civilization is that the more opportunities are seized, the more new ones are created. New opportunities are always easy to find for those who give their best, although it's not as difficult as before to gain distinction in the old ways. Because the level has progressed so much and the competition has increased, the world is no longer made of earth, but of iron in the hands of its workers, and men must make their place with firm and rough blows. Thousands of men have made fortunes from things that others let slip by, like the bee gathers honey from the same flower from which the spider gets poison. Some men will acquire a fortune from the most common and insignificant things, like pieces of leather, cotton waste, slag, or iron filings, while others only reap poverty and failure. There is only one thing that contributes to the well-being and comfort of humanity, hardly a household item, a kitchen utensil, a piece of clothing or food that is not susceptible to improvement, and in that could hide a fortune. Opportunities are always around us. The forces of nature beg to be put to the service of man like lightning, which for centuries has tried to attract attention to the great force of electricity that would do its heavy work and allow the powers given by God to develop. There is latent power everywhere, waiting for the observant eye to discover it. First, one must discover what the world needs, then fulfill that need. An invention to make smoke go in the opposite direction in a chimney might be very ingenious, but would have no use for humanity. The patent office in Washington is full of wonderful devices and ingenious mechanisms, but neither are useful to the inventor nor the world. Yet how many families have been impoverished and struggled for years in misery and pain, while the father worked on useless inventions? As a witness to his childhood, he lost 87 cents while his capital was $1.50 by buying buttons and thread that the buyers didn't need. After that, he established the rule of never buying anything the public didn't desire, and thus prospered. An observant man whose shoe eyelets were broken, but who couldn't afford to buy a new pair, thought a metal hook for shoelaces that could be riveted onto the leather would be useful. So poor that he had to borrow a sickle to cut the grass in front of his rented house, he later became a very wealthy man. An observant barber from Newark, New Jersey, thought he could improve the scissors for cutting hair, invented clippers, and became very rich. A man from Maine, once called from the hayfield to wash his wife's clothes, didn't realize what a washing job was. Seeing that the method was slow and laborious, he invented the washing machine and became rich. A man who suffered terribly from toothaches was so sure there must be a way to fill teeth to avoid the pain that he invented the method of gold filling for teeth. Great things in the world were not made by men of great means. Erikson began building screw propellers in a simple bathroom. The cotton picker was first made in a wooden shack. John Harrison, the great inventor of the marine chronometer, started his career in the attic of an old barn. Fitch installed the pieces of the first steamboat in the sacristy of a church in Philadelphia, which soon began operating in America. McCormick began manufacturing his famous harvester in a mill. The first floating dock model was made in an attic. Clark, the founder of Worcester University, Massachusetts, started his great fortune by making wooden toys in a horse barn. Parkware made umbrellas in his living room, with the help of his daughter, until he sold enough to rent an attic. Edison began his experiments in a baggage car of the Grand Trunk when he was a newsboy. Michelangelo found a piece of Carrara marble, abandoned among the waste in a street in Florence, which a clumsy worker had poorly carved and discarded. Surely many artists noticed the quality of the marble and lamented its waste, but Michelangelo continued to see an angel in the ruin, and with his chisel and hammer he brought forth one of the finest sculptures in Italy. Young David at Patrick Henry was considered a lazy, good-for-nothing farmer, a failure as a businessman. He always dreamed of future greatness and never thought he could be a hero. Between the corn, tobacco, and bags of Virginia, he studied law for 6 weeks and then set to work. People thought he would fail, but in his first trial he demonstrated a wonderful oratory power. That was when he realized he could be a hero in Virginia. After the Stamp Act was adopted, Henry was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses and introduced his famous resolution against the unfair taxes on the American colonies. He rose steadily in rank to become one of the most brilliant and distinguished orators in America. In one of his first speeches on that resolution, he spoke these words, prophetic of his power and courage. Caesar had his Brutus, and Charles I had his Cromwell. Take example from them. If it be treason, make the most of it. The great philosopher of nature, Faraday, who was the son of a blacksmith, wrote when he was young to Adam Free Davis, asking for a job at the Royal Institution. Davis consulted a friend about it. Here's a letter from a young man named Faraday, who has attended my lectures and wishes for a job at the Royal Institution. What should I do? Put him to washing bottles. If he's worth anything, he'll do it straight. If he refuses, he's no good. But the young man, who could conduct experiments in the attic of a pharmacy with an old stove and glass jars, took advantage of every moment he could steal from his work. He saw an opportunity in washing bottles, which quickly led him to a position at the Royal Academy in Woolwich. Tyndall said of this young man without opportunities that he was the greatest experimental philosopher the world had ever seen. He became the wonder of his time. There is a legend about an artist who searched for a long time for a piece of sandalwood to carve a Madonna. He was about to give up in despair, abandoning the vision of his unrealized life, when in a dream it was suggested that he carve his Madonna from a block of oak meant to be burned. He obeyed and produced a masterpiece from a common log. Many of us lose great opportunities in life by waiting to find sandalwood for our sculptures, while in reality they are hidden in the common logs we are always burning. One man spends his life without seeing opportunities to do something great, while another, near him, seizes the same circumstances and takes advantage of the opportunities to achieve great results. Opportunities are everywhere. America is another name for opportunities. All of our history seems to be a final effort by divine providence in favor of the human race. Never before were there such great openings, possibilities, and opportunities. This is true for girls and young women. A new era rises for them. Hundreds of professions and trades that were closed to them just a few years ago now invite them to enter. Perhaps we will not all make great discoveries like Newton, Faraday, Edison, and Thomson, or paint immortal paintings like Michelangelo or Raphael, but we can all make our lives sublime by seizing these common opportunities and transforming them into greatness. What opportunity did young Grace Darling have to distinguish herself by living on those barren rocks by the lighthouse, alone with her old parents? But while her brothers and sisters who moved to the cities to gain wealth and fame are little known in the world, she became far more famous than a princess. This poor girl did not need to go to London to see the nobility. They came to the lighthouse to see her at home. She had gained a fame that royal heirs might envy, and a name that will never perish on earth. She did not go off in the distance, dreaming of glory and fortune, but did her best where duty had placed her. If you want to grow rich, study yourself and your own desires. You will see that millions of people have the same needs. The safest business is always connected to mankind's basic needs. People must have clothing and shelter, they need food, they want comforts and facilities of all kinds for pleasure, education, and culture. Any person who can meet a great deficiency in humanity, improve any process used by people, fulfill any demand for comfort, or contribute in any way to its well-being can make a fortune. That is the golden opportunity. There is never a second chance, so take advantage of the moment when fortune smiles and duty shows the way. Aspiring like this, always sighing for what is distant, inaccessible, and fleeting, while the beauty around you sings its sweet and eternal hymn, is vain. Harriet Winslow said that opportunities are found in the free moments. Love life. Do not waste time, for life is made of this. Franklin said that eternity itself cannot restore the loss. The hours pass and they are our responsibility. Believe me when I tell you that saving time will be rewarded in the future life by an accumulation of benefits beyond your most ardent dreams, while wasting that time will make you diminish both in intellectual and moral stature, beyond your darkest calculations. Gladstone lost somewhere between the rise and the setting of the sun, 2 golden hours, each with 60 minutes of diamond, are not offered in reward because they are lost forever. "What is the price of this book?" asked a man who had spent an hour lingering in Benjamin Franklin's newsstand. $1, replied the seller. $1, repeated the idle man. Can't you accept less? $1 is the price, was the reply. The potential buyer examined the books for sale a bit longer and then asked, "Is Mr. Franklin present?" "Yes," said the clerk. "He is very busy in the printing room." "I wish to see him," insisted the man. The owner was called, and the stranger asked, "What is the lowest price you would accept for this book?" $1.25, Franklin replied quickly. $1.25? But your employee just asked me for $1 a moment ago, said the man. That's true, said Franklin, and I would have preferred to accept $1 rather than interrupt my work. The man appeared surprised, but desiring to close the deal on his own terms, he demanded, "Then tell me, what is your lowest price for this book?" $1.50, Franklin replied. $1.50. You yourself offered it for $1.25. Yes, Franklin answered with extreme coolness, and I would have preferred to accept that price rather than $1.50 now. The man silently left the money on the counter, took his book, and left the store, having received a valuable lesson from a master in the art of transforming time into wealth or wisdom at will. Time losses are found everywhere. On the floor of the gold workroom at the United States Mint in Philadelphia, there is a wooden grate that lifts when the floor is swept to collect fine gold dust particles. Thousands of dollars are thus preserved each year. In this way, every successful person has a sort of net to gather the scratches and cuts of existence, the remnants of days and fragments of hours that most people sweep away as the debris of life. The one who values and makes use of every lost minute, the half-hours, the unexpected holidays, the spaces between hours, and the waiting gaps of the latecomers, achieves results that surprise those who have not mastered this precious secret. Everything I have accomplished, everything I hope to accomplish, or everything I will accomplish, said Helio Burid, has been and will be achieved through this laborious, patient and persevering process of accumulation, which builds the anthill particle by particle, thought by thought, and action by action. And if ever ambition has moved me, its highest and most ardent aspiration has never exceeded the hope of giving the young people of my country an example in the use of these invaluable fragments of time called moments. I wondered how he managed to capture all the talents of the family, said a brother who was in a Brown office after hearing one of Burke's speeches in Parliament. But I remember that while we played, he was always working. The days come to us as friends in disguise, bringing gifts from the invisible hand. But if we do not use them, they silently slip away and never return. Each morning they bring us new gifts, but if we do not accept what they brought us yesterday and the day before, we become less and less capable of using them until the ability to appreciate and use them fades away. It is said that lost wealth can be recovered by industry and economy, lost knowledge by study, lost health by temperance and medicine, but lost time goes away forever and never returns. There are only 5 or 10 minutes before lunchtime. Now there's no time for anything. It's one of the most common expressions in the family. But what monuments have the poor, the seemingly without opportunity, built from small fragments of broken time that we waste? The same hours that others have wasted could have secured their success if they had been improved. Mario Harland accomplished wonders and was able to do so by saving minutes to shape his novels and newspaper articles while his children were in bed and every time he had a free minute. Although he accomplished a great deal, his entire life was interrupted by distractions that would have discouraged most women from attempting anything outside their usual family duties. She glorified the everyday, as few women have done. Harriet Beecher Stowe also wrote her great masterpiece, Uncle Tom's Cabin, amid pressing domestic concerns. Richard Leigh read Froude's England a little each day while waiting for dinner. Longfellow translated the Inferno in 10-minute fragments each day while waiting for his coffee to boil, persisting for many years until the work was completed. Hugh Miller, while working hard as a stonemason, found enough time to read scientific books and write the lessons learned from the blocks of stone he handled. Madame Hemlis, when she was the companion of the future Queen of France, composed several of her charming volumes while waiting for the princess to whom she gave her daily lessons. She wrote many of her finest poems while working on the farm. The author of Paradise Lost was a professor, secretary to the Communion and the Lord Protector, who had to write his sublime poetry every time he could steal a few minutes from his busy life. John Stuart Mill did much of his best work as a writer while employed at the East India Company. Galileo was a surgeon, but thanks to improving and using his free moments, the world has some of his greatest discoveries. If a genius like Gladstone carried a small book in his pocket to not let an unexpected free moment slip away, what should we do, we with common abilities to save the most precious moments from forgetfulness? What a rebuke for a life thus wasted for the thousands of young men and women who throw away entire months and even years, while the great old man cherished even the smallest fragments. More than one great man has built his reputation from unusual fragments of time that others, who wonder at their failure, throw away. In Dante's time, most of Italy's literary men were merchants, doctors, statesmen, judges, or very hard-working soldiers. While Michael Faraday worked on binding books, he devoted all his free time to experiments. One day he wrote to a friend, "Time is all I need. Oh, if I could buy at a low price some of the free hours of our modern nights, not days. Oh, the power of incessant industry to work miracles." Alexander Humboldt's days were so occupied with his affairs that he had to pursue his scientific work at night or early in the morning while everyone slept. 1 hour a day, taken from futile activities and used profitably, would allow any man of ordinary ability to perfectly master a science. 1 hour a day would turn an ignorant man into an informed man in 10 years, enabling him to pay for 2 daily newspapers, 2 weekly papers, 2 major magazines, and at least a dozen good books. In 1 hour a day, a child could carefully read 20 pages, more than 7,000 pages, or 18,000 large pages in a year. 1 hour a day could make the difference between a mere existence and a useful, happy life. 1 hour a day can make or has made an unknown man famous, a useless person into a benefactor of his race. Consider the powerful possibilities of 2, 4, or 6 hours a day, which are the average number of hours young men and women waste in the relentless quest for entertainment and distraction. Every young person should have a hobby to occupy their leisure hours, something useful to which they can devote themselves with pleasure. It may or may not be related to their work, but their heart must be engaged. If well chosen, study, research, and occupation that provides passion will broaden the character and transform the home. There is nothing that prevents it except too much idleness, as Burke observed, which fills a man's time much more completely and makes him less master of himself than any other occupation. Some young people will receive a good education from the details of time that others waste recklessly, just as a man saves a fortune from small savings that others despise. What young person is too busy to devote 1 hour a day to their own improvement? Charles C. Frost, the famous shoemaker from Vermont, decided to devote 1 hour a day to study. He became one of the most remarkable mathematicians in the United States and also forged an enviable reputation in other fields of knowledge. John Hunter, just like Napoleon, allowed himself only 4 hours of sleep. Professor Owen spent 10 years organizing and classifying more than 24,000 specimens of comparative anatomy that Hunter's industry had collected. This is a record for a young man who began his studies while working as a simple carpenter. Yonku Adams bitterly complained when his time was stolen by those who had no right to it. An Italian scholar placed the inscription on his door, "Whoever stays here must join me in my work." Carlyle, Tennyson, Browning, and Dickens signed a protest against the organ grinders who disturbed their work. Many of the greatest men in history have sung their glory outside of their usual occupations at moments that most people let pass. Spencer became famous in his free time as Lord Deputy's secretary in Ireland. Sir John Locke's fame is due to his prehistoric studies conducted alongside his banking occupations. Chaudet, who was rarely idle, wrote 100 volumes. Houtrum's notebook shows that he never let a thought or fortuitous circumstance slip away. Franklin was an unyielding worker who compressed his meals and sleep into the shortest possible time in order to free up time for study. When he was a child, he grew impatient with his father's long prayers at the table and asked if he couldn't just thank in one go for the whole barrel, thus saving time. He wrote some of his best works aboard, such as his Improvement of Navigation and Smoky Chimneys. There is a lesson in the brief 37 years of Raphael for those who use the lack of time as an excuse to waste their lives. Great men have always been thieves of moments. If Ceron said that what others devote to public spectacles and entertainment is more mental and physical rest, I devote mine to the study of philosophy. The fame of Lord Bacon came from the work he accomplished during his leisure hours while he was Chancellor of England. During an interview with a great monarch, Goethe suddenly excused himself, went to an adjacent room, and wrote a thought for his Faust, so as not to forget it. Sir Humphrey Davy reached eminence during his leisure moments in a pharmacy attic. Pope always got up at night to write the thoughts that didn't come to him during his busy days. Grote wrote his incomparable history of Greece during the leisure hours stolen from his banking duties. George Stephenson took advantage of moments as if they were gold. He educated himself and did much of his best work during his free time, learning arithmetic during his night shifts as an engineer. Mozart never let a moment pass without improving his work. He worked so intensely that he often didn't have enough time to sleep, sometimes writing for 2 entire nights and 1 full day in a row, and wrote his famous Requiem on his deathbed. Caesar said that in the midst of the fiercest battles, he always found time to think about many other things. Once, shipwrecked, he had to swim to shore, but he had with him the manuscript of his commentaries that he had been working on when the ship sank. Dr. Mason Good translated Lucretius while riding a horse to visit his patients in London. Dr. Darwin composed most of his works by writing his thoughts on scraps of paper wherever he happened to be. Watt learned chemistry and mathematics while working in his trade as a mathematical instrument maker. Henry Kirkwaite learned Greek while going back and forth from the lawyer's office where he studied. Dr. Barney learned Italian and French on horseback. Matthew Hale wrote his reflections while traveling on circuit as a judge. The present time is the raw material with which we do what we want. Do not worry about the past nor dream of the future, but rather seize the moment and draw your lesson from the hour. The man who properly measures and realizes the value of an hour has not yet been born, as Peneleon says. God never gives more than 1 moment at a time and does not give a second until it withdraws the price. Lord Bragan could not bear to waste a moment, but he was so systematic that he always seemed to have more free time than many who failed to achieve even a tenth of what he did. He distinguished himself in politics, law, science, and literature. Dr. Johnson wrote Rasselas in a single week of nights to be able to cover his mother's funeral expenses. Lincoln studied law during his free hours while doing surveying and learned common branches of knowledge on his own while running the store. Mrs. Somerville learned botany and astronomy and wrote books while her neighbors chatted and lazed around. Thus, at the age of 80, she published Molecular and Microscopic Science. The worst part of a lost hour is not so much the lost time as the energy wasted. Idleness rusts the nerves and cracks the muscles. Work has a system, while laziness has none. The president never went to bed before mapping out his plans for the next day. Dalton's industry was the passion of his life. He made and recorded over 200,000 weather observations. In textile factories, a single broken thread ruins the whole web. One tracks the person who made the mistake, and the loss is deducted from their pay. But who will pay for the broken threads in the great web of life? We cannot toss an empty loom back and forth, and those of some kind follow every movement while we weave the web of our destiny. It cannot be a poor thread. Wasted hours and missed opportunities will spoil the fabric and torment the worker forever. Or perhaps it is a golden thread that will add beauty and brilliance. We cannot stop the loom or tear out the unfortunate thread that stretches across the fabric, a perpetual witness to our folly. No one cares about a young person as long as they are busy with useful work. But where do they have lunch at noon? Where do they go when they leave their boarding house in the evening? What do they do after dinner? Where do they spend their Sundays and holidays? The vast majority of young people who squander time after dinner, many of those who rise to honor and glory, dedicate their afternoons to study, work, or the company of those who can help them improve. Every night is a crisis in a young person's career. There is profound meaning in White's lines. This day we forge destiny, our web of destiny we weave this day for all the rest. We choose holiness or sin. Time is money. We must not be stingy or petty with it, but we must not waste an hour more than we would waste a $1 bill. The loss of time means the loss of energy, vitality, and character. Dissipation means the waste of opportunities that will never return. Pay attention to how you lose time, for all your future lives in it. And everyone has a chance, says Edward Everest. Cultivate all talents, watch for all possibilities of improvement with an eagle's eye, redeem time, resist temptation, and despise sensual pleasures, so that you can become useful, honored, and happy. Just as poor boys and girls go to college, can I afford to go to college? Ask many young Americans who have barely $1 and are aware that a college education involves years of sacrifice and struggle. It seems like an obstacle. Indeed, a young person with the ambition to do something in the world is forced to pay their way through school and college by hard work. But history shows us that the men who have led human progress have generally been self-taught and made themselves. The average young person today who wishes to obtain a liberal education has 100 times more chances than Daniel Webster or James A. Garfield. There is almost no healthy person reading these lines who cannot be sure that if they want to, they can do it here as well as anywhere. The will often has the power to open the path, and there have never been so many resources open to strong will and unyielding determination as today. Among the 5,000 people directly linked to Harvard University, writes a graduate, 500 are students who rely totally or almost entirely on their own resources. However, they do not form a poor group, since half of them have incomes above the average student of small universities, from $700 to $1,000. These are not exceptional annual incomes for a student capable of doing press work or giving private lessons, well-paying jobs at Harvard. Some men earn much more. A companion of the writer entered college with about $25 as a freshman. He had a hard struggle, but during his first year he thrived, and in his last 10 months of college work, he managed to exceed the university fees, which were not very low, by more than $3,000. He earned his money through advertising schemes and other editorial businesses. A few months after graduation, he married. He now lives comfortably in Cambridge, the son of poor parents living in Springfield, New York. He opened his way in an academy. It only awakened his appetite for knowledge, and he decided to advance by relying entirely on himself for success. As a result, he headed to Schenectady and made an agreement with a professor at Union College that he would pay his tuition by working. He rented a small room to live and study, and his food expenses, limited to bread and milk, never exceeded 50 cents a week. After graduation, he dedicated himself to civil engineering and later to building iron bridges of his own design. He obtained many valuable patents and amassed a fortune. His life was a success, based on self-confidence and integrity. Albert, the young senator from Indiana, entered college with only the $50 borrowed from a friend. He worked as an administrator of a college club and added to his initial fund of $50 the $25 he earned from his first-year writing prize. When summer came, he returned to work in the harvest fields and broke the wheat-cutting records in his county. He carried his books with him morning, afternoon, and evening, and studied with persistence. When he returned to college, he began to be recognized as an exceptional man. He had forged his path and worked in the same field. The president of his class at Columbia University recently earned the money to pay for his studies by selling farm equipment. One of his classmates, with the savings from 2 years of work as an agricultural laborer and money earned by giving tutoring lessons, writing papers, and doing copies during his study hours, not only paid for his university, but also helped support his elderly parents. He believed he could afford a university education and succeeded at the University of Chicago. Many hundreds of courageous young people are making their way. The ways of earning money are diverse, depending on job opportunities and the skills and adaptability of the student. Being a correspondent for the city newspapers is the most coveted task, but only a few can secure those positions. A dozen or more teach in night schools, several teach in public schools during the day, and do their university work in the afternoon and evening to earn their degrees. Some distribute newspapers, earning $2.50 to $3.50 a week, but since this doesn't cover expenses, they take on other jobs. Only a few find nighttime work in the city library. Some tend lawns in the summer and boilers in the winter, earning $5 to $10 a week by overseeing several. Many work as boys in clubs and restaurants. Some take ads. Second-year theology students preach in their small villages. Several are tutors. 2 young men each earned $1,500 doing this work in 1 year. One student is a member of a city orchestra and earns $12 a week. Some work at the university post office and earn 20 cents an hour. The president of a representative American university recently stated, "I believe it is generally advantageous for a student to pay his own way, partly as a condition for obtaining a university education. It gives reality and vigor to the work that is less likely to be found in those who are pushed through university without having to work themselves. However, I do not consider it desirable that one must work entirely by his own means, as the burden of strength and time may be such that it interferes with intellectual pursuits and weakens health. Circumstances rarely favor great men. A modest start is no obstacle to a great career. The young man who works his way through college may encounter difficulties, but he will learn how to carve his path in life and will always occupy a higher rank in school and in his future life compared to his classmate who is the son of a millionaire. It is the son and daughter of the farmer, the mechanic, and the laborer. The great middle class of our country, whose resources are modest and opportunities limited, will largely depend on good citizenship and future talents for the Republic. The problem of securing a good education when means are limited and time is short is of great importance both to the individual and to the nation. The experiences of many brilliant young people who have managed to earn deserving diplomas offer encouragement and useful advice. Gaius B. Frost, a graduate of the Bratrero Institute, taught in district schools for 6 terms and entered Dartmouth College with just enough money to cover the initial necessary expenses. He worked in gardens and as a janitor for a time. During his studies, he taught 6 terms as a high school principal and 1 year as assistant superintendent at the Scoonty Trance School in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He pushed a wheelchair at the Columbia Exposition in Chicago and was a doorman for 1 season at Watch Hill House. He campaigned for an editorial. One summer in Maine, none of his classmates worked harder to obtain an education. Isaac J. Cox from Philadelphia worked his way into the Kimball Academy in Maryland and Dartmouth College by doing various types of work. No honest job he undertook within his abilities was too difficult for him to finance his studies. He worked summers as a bellboy in a hotel in the White Mountains, eventually becoming the head bellboy. Like Mr. Frost, he held a good position in his classes and became a young man of solid character and distinguished achievements. For 4 years, Richard Weil stood out as the great prize winner at Columbia College, focusing his time, attention, and energy on any remunerative work. He was ready to do any job to earn money, and every penny earned, like every hour not spent sleeping during his 4 years of university, was dedicated to obtaining his long-desired education. All these young people, and many others among the bright and well-trained youth who have graduated from the colleges and universities of the country in recent years, sincerely and tenaciously believed that a university education was something they had to have. The question of whether or not they could afford it does not seem to have raised many doubts among them. It is clear that they did not consider for a moment the impossibility of going to university. An inquiry conducted to determine the exact figures and facts that a poor young person faces on the way to university revealed that, in a list of 45 representative colleges and universities with a student population of about 40,000 people, the average fees per year amounted to $304, with the maximum cost reaching $529 at some smaller universities. The minimum cost per year is $75 to $110. Many manage with fees of $150 to $200 a year, while the maximum cost rarely exceeds $1,000 in Western and Southern universities. The averages are lower, For example, 18 recognized Western universities have average general fees of $242 per year, while 14 recognized Eastern institutions have average fees of $444. The statistics on fees and self-help opportunities at some of the most well-known Eastern institutions are very interesting. Some institutions offer scholarships for future ministers, enrollment scholarships for other students of good character, good habits, and good standing, as well as free rooms. They make low-interest loans and provide students with opportunities to earn money through tutoring, table services, stenography, building maintenance, newspaper correspondence, laundries, book sales, etc. $500 per year covers all necessary expenses. There are almost 100 scholarships ranging from $50 to $75 per year without limiting the habits or social privileges of the recipients. Students who find a job in the library or in the laboratories can earn about a quarter of their expenses, which range from $300 to $400 for the academic year. Brown University has over 100 scholarships and a loan fund. Room rent is often covered in exchange for services related to university buildings, requiring study and thrift from the benefiting students. Many students earn money in various ways, with average annual fees of $500. At Columbia University, the average cost is $547, the lowest being $387. A large number of students who know how to manage in a big city find their way at Columbia. Cornell University offers free tuition and room for senior and junior students who have a good reputation for studies and behavior. It has 36 two-year scholarships of $200 each for freshmen, obtained through successful competitive exams. It also has 512 state scholarships for tuition fees. Many students support themselves in part by serving at the table, doing stenography, working for the newspaper, etc., with an average annual cost per student of $500. Dartmouth has about 300 scholarships. Those over $50 are conditional on class ranking. Some rooms have nominal rents. The requirements are thrift and total abstinence. Students in need must perform various types of work. Some get by with less than $250 a year, the average cost being around $400. Harvard offers about 275 scholarships, ranging from $70 to $400 each, large funds for beneficiaries, and loans from $40 to $250 for promising and needy freshmen. Freshmen are generally excluded from faculty employment committees. Some students earn money as stenographers, typists, reporters, tutors, secretaries, promoters, and singers. Their annual expenses, excluding clothing, laundry, books and stationery, laboratory fees, society memberships, subscriptions and services, range from $358 to $1,035. In a recent year, the University of Pennsylvania awarded $43,242 in scholarships and financial aid to 315 students, with no further requirements than good standing. No loans or free rooms are provided. Many students support themselves in part, and only a few do so entirely. The average annual cost, excluding clothing, train tickets, etc., is $450. Wesleyan University covers all or part of tuition for 2/3 of its undergraduate students. Funds are available for loans. Recipients must be frugal and abstinent, maintain good standing, and exhibit good conduct. Many students are self-sufficient. 35% of all students earn their own money, with annual expenses of $325. Child is relatively well endowed with scholarships and prizes, covering all tuition fees except for $40 for deserving, regular, and studious students. Many of these students earn their own money, with average annual costs of about $600. There are splendid opportunities for young women at some of the most solid and well-known women's colleges in the United States. The number of young women at the University of Michigan who cover their own expenses is high. Most of them, says Dr. Elisa M. Moser, the female dean of the university, earn their money by giving lessons. It is rare for students to come here for 2 years, then leave for a while to earn money to complete their education. Some of our most deserving graduates have done this. Some cut their expenses by working as boys in boarding houses to cover their housing. Others obtain lodging and meals from professors by providing 3 hours of daily service at home. Some take care of children for 2 or 3 hours a day in professors' families. One particularly brave and serious young woman worked as a waitress on a steamship on the lake last year and eagerly did the same this year. Her goal is to earn $100 with that sum, and the possibility of paying for lodging and food by providing service will cover next year's expenses. Since it is particularly difficult to find good servants in this interior city, some people are delighted to offer this type of job to university students. "It is my opinion," says Mrs. Mary Aguli, president of Mount Holger College, "that if a young woman with average intelligence and energy desires a university education, she can achieve it. To my knowledge, young women who have earned money to pay for their university education have done so by giving private lessons, doing typing or stenography. Some of them earn money during their studies by giving private lessons, doing typing, sewing, working in libraries and offices during the summer, and in various other ways, such as preparing lunches, taking care of rooms, running errands, and working for newspapers." At Mount Holger, there aren't many opportunities to earn a lot of money, but an ingenious girl can succeed in various ways. The mandatory domestic service system now in place at Mount Holger, where each university student reduces her fees by $100 to $150 in exchange for 30 to 50 minutes of light domestic work each day, was previously used at Wesley. It is now limited to a few country houses and is not present at Brands Mid-Bazaar or at affiliated universities like Barnard and Radcliffe. In city universities like these two, housing and food are more expensive than in the countryside, and it is harder for a girl to cover a large part of her expenses by her own efforts while pursuing her studies at the same time. However, several girls at Barnard pay for their clothing, books, car, and personal expenses by doing the work they can find. Tutoring positions at Barnard are rarely available for undergraduates, as the lists are always filled with experienced professors who can be hired by the hour. Typing is one of the favorite means. One student did very well as an agent for a company that makes college caps and gowns. Another girl, a Russian Jewish girl from the Lower East Side in New York, runs a small workshop where she employs several women to make packaging for women's clothes and children's clothing. She paid all her education costs this way. "Some of her students make their way?" asked an authority from Brainmark. "To some extent," was the response, "but not many. The lowest total fees for a year range between $400 and $500. This amount adequately covers everything. 2 young women can cover part of their expenses by taking care of the library and selling stationery items, one contributing to the mail and others giving private lessons. Those who give private lessons receive $1 or $1.50, and sometimes a very good one receives $2.50 per lesson. Earning all that can be earned in a university year while keeping up with all studies is very difficult and rare. However, several are able to pay half of their tuition fees." A similar question asked to a student at Bazaar received the following answer. "Well, I know a girl who has a sign on her door that says ironed clothes, and she makes a lot of money. Of course, there are many rich girls who do something similar, and clients are willing to pay well for that. So these girls make a significant amount of money in the evenings and weekends. Other girls work as agents for 2 of the major chocolate cream manufacturers. The girl who plays the piano for the gym exercises is paid for it, and some girls paint and make fancy items that they sell here or send to stores in New York. Some also write for newspapers and magazines, while others have music students in Poughkeepsie. There are many girls who manage to cover a large part of their expenses. Typing, tutoring, assisting in libraries, laboratories, or offices provide valuable help to many girls who want to support themselves. In almost all schools, in addition to these classic jobs, teaching at night schools sometimes offers a good opportunity to make a living. In many institutions, there is an opportunity for a girl with taste and skilled hands to work as a seamstress, repairer, and general restorer for students. Orders for gym clothes and swimsuits mean good profits. The era of camisole belts has been a blessing for many, as the well-dressed girl never has enough stylish clothes, and by strategically displaying attractive models, she is tempted to expand her offerings. Furthermore, any girl skilled in the art of sewing can make a camisole belt without needing professional knowledge in cutting and sewing. Today, no young person in the United States, if they have good moral health and courage, should despair of pursuing a university education, unless they have extremely exceptional reasons. West of the Alleghenies, higher education is accessible to all classes. In most public universities, tuition is free. For example, in Kansas, housing can be obtained for $12 per month, University fees are $5 per year, while the average student expenses do not exceed $200 per year. In Ohio, the state university has eliminated all tuition fees, and most religious colleges charge lower fees than the usual New England standard for half a century. In part due to the affordable cost of higher education in Ohio, the state sends more students to university than all of New England combined. However, while the total cost is lower in the West, opportunities for self-help are, in contrast, more significant in the East, and every young person should carefully consider before concluding that a university education is out of reach. Former President Tracker of Dark Mode says that the student who finds their way can do so easily and successfully, or may be seriously harmed both by their needs and by the time they are forced to dedicate to outside matters. I've seen the children of wealthy men be leaders in scholarship, just like the children of poor men. Poverty, in most of the conditions where we find it in universities, is a stimulus. Dartmouth College is a good example of this. The majority of its support comes from poor people. Without looking at the statistics, I must say that, based on the facts I have observed, a higher percentage of Dartmouth men have achieved distinction compared to almost all other American universities. The opportunities today are 10 times greater than those of half a century ago. Former President Sherman of Cornell recalls his youth. At 13, I left home without any definite plans for my future. I just wanted to enter a town and make a little money. My father found me a job in the nearest town, Summerside, a village of about 1,000 inhabitants. For my first year of work, I was to receive $30 and food. Think about these young people today. $30 a year for working from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., but I was happy to get this job because it was a start in the world, and the little village seemed like a city to my country eyes. Since I started working in the store, I have always supported myself, and for many years of my childhood, I never received a penny that I hadn't earned myself. At the end of my first year, I went to a bigger store in the same town, where I was to receive $60 a year and my food. My salary had doubled, and I was doing very well. I stayed in that job for 2 years. Then I left the store against my employer's wishes because I had decided I wanted to get a better education. I decided to go to college. I didn't know how I was going to manage, except that it would be through my own efforts. I had saved about $80 from my work at the store, and that was all I had in the world. When I told my employer my plan, he tried to talk me out of it, showing me the difficulties of going to college and offered to double my salary if I stayed in the store. This was a turning point in my life. On one side, there was the certainty of $120 a year and the prospect of rapid promotion, which I deserved. Remember what $120 meant to me on Prince Edward Island, a poor boy who had never owned such an amount in his life. On the other side, there was my hope of getting an education. I knew it involved hard work and self-denial, and that there was a possibility of final failure, but my decision was made. I wouldn't turn back. I must say that I do not regret this early decision, even though I think I would have been a successful merchant with my capital of $80. I attended the village high school to prepare for college. I had only 1 year to do it. My money wouldn't last longer. I studied Latin, Greek, and algebra every day, and during the following 40 weeks I studied with an intensity I had never known before. At the end of the year, I took the exams for a scholarship to Prince of Wales College in Charlotte on the island. I had little hope of winning it, as my preparation had been very quick and incomplete, but when the results were announced, I found that not only had I won the county scholarship, but I was the first among all the competitors on the island. The scholarship I had received amounted to only $60 a year. It seems small, but I can say now, after almost 30 years, that winning it was the greatest success I had. I've had other rewards that for most people would seem infinitely more important, but with this difference, this first success was essential, because without it, I couldn't have continued. I could have done without the others if necessary for 2 years. Young Sherman attended Prince of Wales College, living off his scholarship and what he could earn by carrying books for one of the village merchants, spending less than $100 during the whole academic year. Then he taught at a rural school for a year, then went to Acadia College in Nova Scotia to complete his studies. One of Mr. Acadia's classmates says he distinguished himself primarily by winning all the prizes he could claim. In his final year, he learned about a scholarship at the University of London, offered in competition to students from Canadian colleges. The scholarship offered $500 a year for 3 years. The young Acadia student, eager to continue his studies in England, saw this offer as an opportunity and took the exam to win the prize in competition with the brightest students from recognized Canadian colleges. During the 3 years spent at the University of London, Mr. Sherman became deeply interested in studying philosophy and decided that he had found the work of his life in this discipline. He wanted to go to Germany to study with the great philosophical thinkers. The London Society offered him a travel scholarship of $2,000 per year. Men of merit from major English universities like Oxford and Cambridge were among the competitors, but the poor boy from Prince Edward Island succeeded again, much to the surprise of others. At the end of his studies in Germany, Mr. Sherman, now a doctor of philosophy, returned to Acadia College to become a professor. Shortly afterward, he was called to Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. In 1886, when a chair of philosophy was created at Cornell, President White, having known the brilliant young Canadian, invited him to take the position. 2 years later, Dr. Sherman became the Dean of the School of Psychology at Cornell, and in 1892, when the presidency of the university became vacant, he was appointed to head the great institution. At that time, he was only 38 years old. A well-known graduate of Hampstead's University provided the following figures, which are of great relevance to the young person who sincerely desires to go to university. With $8.42 in my pocket during the year, I earned $60. I received a scholarship of $60 from the university and an additional gift of $20. I applied for a loan of $190. My weekly expenses during my first year were $4.50. In addition, I spent $10.55 on books, $23.45 on clothes, $10.57 on voluntary subscriptions, $15 on train tickets, and $8.24 on various items. The following summer, I earned $100 by working as a waiter at $1 a day boarding house throughout my second year, and I earned a half board by keeping my old room for $1 per week. The expenses for my second year totaled $394.50. I earned $87.20 during the year, including food. I received a $70 scholarship, gifts worth $12.50, and I applied for a loan of $150, which allowed me to cover the expenses. In my first year, I rented a nice furnished room for $60 per year, which I had to pay for by working at home for office tasks, etc. I earned $37. I also obtained full board by working as a waiter, received a $70 scholarship, $55 in gifts, and I applied for a loan of $70, which balanced my accounts for the year, except for the $40 tuition fee. The expenses for the year, including of course the total cost of board, housing and tuition fees, were $478.76. The following summer, I earned $40, and for the entire next year, I maintained the same room under the same conditions as the previous year, working as a waiter the entire time and receiving full board. I earned $40 through office work, tutoring, etc. I applied for a loan of $40, received a $70 scholarship, won a $25 prize, and received $35 in gifts. The expenses for the final year, totaling $496.64, were higher than in previous years. However, having secured a good position as a professor for the following year, I was allowed to cover the difference with my salary, which enabled me to finish my studies without any financial problems. The total cost of my education was around $1,700, of which $1,157 was earned through scholarships and other income. 25% of recent Yale graduates paid for all of their studies themselves. It seems no avenue was overlooked to earn money. Tutoring, copying, working in newspapers, and secretarial jobs were well occupied, and positions as painters, drummers, foundry workers, machinists, bicycle agents, and mail carriers were among the 25. In a neighborhood of Boston, there are 10,000 students, many coming from rural areas and industrial towns, with a large number coming from farms in the West. Many of them finance their education with money they have earned with their own hands. It is said that money that is not earned does not enrich. The money a student earns to finance their own education truly enriches their life. It is real gold. Every young person should think carefully before concluding that a university education is out of reach. If Henry Wilson working early and late on a farm with no educational opportunities, forced until he was 21 to care for a pair of oxen and 6 sheep, was able to read 1,000 good books before the end of his time, if the slave Frederick Douglass, on a plantation where it was almost criminal to teach a slave to read, was able to learn the alphabet from scraps of paper, barn signs and old almanacs to reach prominence, if the poor deaf boy, who made shoes in a charity house, became the greatest biblical scholar of his time, where is the child or young girl today under the American flag who cannot receive a decent education and escape the many disadvantages of ignorance? If a man empties his purse into his head, says Franklin, no one can take it away from him. An investment in knowledge always yields the best returns. The opportunity is here. What are you going to do with it? Never before has the opportunity for the educated man been as great as it is today. Never before has there been such demand for the qualified man, one who can do a thing beautifully well. At the door of every vocation, you read a sign that says, "We are looking for a man." No matter how many millions are unemployed, the whole world is looking for a man who can do things, a qualified thinker who can accomplish everything he undertakes a little better than what has been done before. Everywhere we see men with small abilities but well-educated, surpassing those with more abilities but half-educated. A man with a single talent, magnificently trained, always gets the job, while a man with many talents, untrained or half-trained, loses it. Never before has ignorance been so disadvantaged as it is today, although the opportunities awaiting the educated man, the university graduate, when he enters practical life have never been as great or numerous. The dangers and temptations one faces have never been so great, numerous, and insidious. Any education that does not elevate, refine, and enrich its recipient is a curse rather than a blessing. A liberal education only adds to an individual's vice, making them more dishonest and dangerous. Cultivated malice is an infinitely greater threat to society than ignorant malice. Every year, thousands of young men and women graduate with full ambitions and hopes, ready to face the practical world for the first time. Perhaps nothing needs to be warned against more for the graduate than the fever of gain that has taken over the American people. Nothing is more fatal to the development of the highest instincts and most refined desires and the noblest aims. Wealth, for us, multiplies a man's power to the point that everything gravitates around it. A man's genius, his art, what he represents, is largely measured by the amount of dollars he can bring in. How much can I get for my picture? How many royalties for my book? How much can I extract from my specialty, my profession, not my business? How can I make more money or become rich? This is the big question of the century. How will the graduate answer it? The pressure of the dollar is so strong in every aspect of life that the ideal often tends to diminish or be lost. The artistic aspect suffers. The wings of the soul are weighed down by gold, and the commercial spirit tends to bring everything down to its low and sordid level. This is the subtle threat that seeks to corrupt the graduate's ambition. Everywhere he looks, the dollar mark will sway in his vision. The god of money, to whom almost everyone worships in one way or another, will tempt him from all sides. Never before has such pressure been placed on educated youth to sell their mind and turn their skills into dollars, to prostitute their education. As it is today, the commercial rewards offered are so dazzling and amazing that it takes a strong and vigorous character to resist their temptation. Even when the call to do something related to money speaks loudly, the siren song of money, today persistent, fascinating, and overwhelming, almost always drowns out the quiet little voice that calls you to follow the calling within your own blood and brain structure. Tens of thousands of young people, freshly graduated, find themselves at the threshold of active life, full of grand ideals and glorious visions, hopeful and full of promises. But many of them will quickly be contaminated by money. The fatal germ will spread throughout their nature, inoculating their ambition with its vicious virus, and in a few years, their beautiful academic vision will fade away. Their aspirations for something higher will gradually die, replaced by sordid, selfish material ideals. The most unfortunate day in a young person's career is the day when their ideals begin to darken and their high standards begin to fall. The day when the selfish, profit-driven germ is born in them. It pulls the whole nature out of its rightful orbit. You will need to be constantly on guard to resist the attack of this germ after graduation and entry into the world, for powerful will be the influences that will try to deteriorate your standards, lower your ideals, and completely enroll you. When you plunge into the world of things, you will constantly be in contact with people of lower ideals who are motivated only by sordid, selfish objects. Then dies the man within you, unless you are made of superior material. What a contrast there is between this high and noble thing represented by a university degree and what many degree holders represent a quarter of a century later. It is always hard to see any relation between the two. The Native American graduates, transformed by the inspiring and uplifting influences of the schools and colleges that educated them, are barely recognizable by their own tribes when they return home. They quickly begin to transform under the degrading influence they encounter after leaving university. But soon, they begin to shed their cleanliness, their refined manners, their improved language, and their general culture. The Indian covering replaces their modern clothes, and they gradually fall back into their former barbarism, returning to the condition of an Indian. The influences that will surround you when you leave university or your specialized training school will be just as powerful in pulling you back as those that cause the young Indian to return to barbarism. The shock you will experience moving from an atmosphere of high ideals and beautiful promises in which you have lived for 4 years to a very practical, cold and sordid materialism will be a difficult trial for your character and your manhood. But the graduate whose training and education count for something must be able to resist the shock and bear all temptations. The educated man must be able to do something better than just putting money in his pocket. Making money cannot compare to making men. There is something far more precious than being a millionaire of money. It is being a millionaire of knowledge, culture, aid to your fellow men, a millionaire of character, a gentleman. No matter the titles you earn at school or university, no matter the distinction you acquire in your career, no title will ever mean as much or be as noble as that of a gentleman. A sharp and sure sense of honor, said the former President Eliot of Harvard University, is the best result of university life. The graduate who has not acquired this sharp and sure sense of honor, which marks the gentleman, loses the best of what university education can offer. Your future graduate, like a great block of white and pure marble, remains intact before you. You have the chisel and the hammer, your ability and education in your hands. There is something in the block for you, and it lives in your ideal. Will you be an angel or a demon? What are your ideals when you stand on the threshold of active life? Will you strike the block and turn it into a distorted or hideous piece, or will you make a statue of grace and beauty, a statue that will transmit to future generations the story of a noble life? Great responsibilities create great obligations. They cannot be separated. A liberal education significantly increases a man's obligations and entails a responsibility that he cannot avoid without paying the price in a drooping soul, an atrophied mind, a warped conscience, and a narrow field of usefulness. It is more shameful for a university graduate to degrade himself with petty and low practices than for a man who has received no liberal education. The educated man has glimpsed the power of the greatest things, and he is supposed to look up, not down. He must aspire, not degrade himself. We cannot help but think that it is worse for a man who has benefited from all the advantages of a liberal education to go astray than for a man who has had no insight into higher things, for where much has been given, much is expected. The world has the right to expect that where there is an educated and trained man, people will say of him what Lincoln said of Walt Whitman, "There is a man." The world has the right to expect that the graduate, once exposed to the light and having felt its power, will not turn his back on it, that he will not dishonor his alma mater, who gave him a superior opportunity in life and opened the door to opportunities. Society has the right to expect that a man who has learned to skillfully use the tools of life will be an artist, not a craftsman, that he will never stop growing. Society has the right to expect that the academic will be a refining and uplifting force in his community, an aspiration for those who have not had his precious opportunity. It is justified to expect him to elevate the level of intelligence in his community, to illustrate in his personality the finest of his culture. The possible glory of life has the right to expect that he will not be a victim of the restrictive and overwhelming influence of greed, that he will not be a slave to the dollar, nor degrade himself to a greedy and avaricious career, that he will be free from the sordidness that always characterizes the ignorant rich. You have superior ability and opportunities, which simply means that you have a great responsibility to do something extraordinary for your fellow men, a special message for the community. If the torch of learning has been placed in your hand, its meaning is that you must light the path of the less fortunate. If you have received a message that carries freedom for those enslaved by ignorance and fanaticism, you have no right to suppress it. Your education means a greater obligation to live your life up to your gift and superior opportunity. Your duty is to convey your message to the world with all the vigor and strength you possess. What will we think of a man who has been endowed with divine gifts, who has had the invaluable advantage of a liberal education, with the ability to improve the harsh conditions of his fellow humans, to help them free themselves from ignorance and monotony? What will we think of this divinely gifted and magnificently equipped man who, instead of using his education to uplift his peers, uses it to demoralize and degrade them, who uses his talent in the book he writes, the painting he paints, or in his business, whatever it may be, to deceive, demoralize, and corrupt, who uses his light as bait to lead his fellow men to the rocks and reefs instead of as a beacon to guide them to the harbor? We imprison the thief for invading our affairs and stealing, but what shall we do with the educated villain who uses his trained mind and all his gifts to ruin the very people who admire him as a guide? The greatest thing you can do is to be what you must be. A great man said that no one will settle for living a half-life once they discover it is a half-life, because the other half, the superior one, will pursue them. Your higher education has allowed you to perceive the higher life. Never lose sight of your academic vision. Do not be swayed by the maxims of low and sordid prudence that will plant themselves in your ears wherever you go. Consider as an insult the slightest suggestion to turn your education and your high ideals into dollars, to lower your level and prostitute your education through base and sordid practices. Tell yourself that if the highest in me does not bring success, surely the lowest, the worst, will not either. The mission of the educated man is to show the world a higher and more refined type of manliness. The world has the right to expect better results from the work of an educated man, something more refined, superior, and of better quality than from one who lacks early training. The man who has discovered only a small part of himself, good enough, very good, applied to character or work, has mediocre standards for an educated man. He should be able to demonstrate that the graduate has learned to skillfully use the tools of life, to concentrate his faculties in such a way that he can devote his whole being to his task, not just a part of himself. Low ideals, sloppy work, directionless efforts, without system or enthusiasm, should have no place in his program. It is shameful for a man with a liberal education to do shoddy work, demoralize his ideals, discredit his teachers, and dishonor the institution that gave him the opportunity to be a superior man. Keep your eyes on the model, not on your hands, is the command of a great master as he walks among his students, criticizing their work. The problem for most of us is that we do not keep our eyes on the model. Rather, we lose our earlier vision. A liberal education should broaden a man's mind so that he is able to constantly keep his eyes on the model, the perfect ideal of his work, without being influenced by the 1,001 small annoyances, arguments, misunderstandings, and discord that destroy much of the effectiveness of the narrowest and least cultured minds. The graduate must be able to rise above these things in order to use all his intellectual capacity and energy, thus investing his whole being into work that is worthwhile. After the withdrawal of a play that has been on stage for a short time, we always read this comment: an artistic success, but a financial failure. Although education should develop all that is highest and best in a man, it should also make him a practical man, not a financial failure. Make sure that it is your knowledge that possesses you and not the other way around. Simply possessing a degree will make you look ridiculous and highlight you as a failure if you cannot put your education into practice. Knowledge is only power when it is made available and used practically. Only the part of your education that you can use will benefit you or the world. The great question you must ask yourself in the practical world is, what can you do with what you know? Can you transform your knowledge into power? Your ability to read your diploma in Latin is not proof of true education. A filled memory does not make an educated man. The knowledge that can be used and transformed into power constitutes the only true education. There are thousands of educated men in the universities of this country, loaded with knowledge that they have never been able to use for the purposes of work. There is a great difference between absorbing knowledge, turning the brain into a sponge, and transforming every bit of knowledge into power, into work capital, just as the silkworm transforms the mulberry leaf into satin. You must transform your knowledge into practical wisdom. There is no situation in life where the beneficial influence of a well-assimilated education does not make itself felt. The educated person should be an admirable figure everywhere. The awareness of being well-educated should make someone at ease in any society. The knowledge that someone's mind has been expanded through university training, that they have discovered their possibilities, adds not only wonderfully to their happiness, but also immeasurably increases self-confidence. Self-confidence is the lever that moves the world. Everywhere we see men of good ability who feel powerless all their lives and are constantly mortified by the poverty of their language, narrow ideals, and restricted vision of life because they are not educated. A man beautifully trained can walk the world with his head held high, aware that he is unlikely to show ignorance in any company or feel mortified by the ignorance of subjects that any well-educated person apparently knows. This assurance, based on knowledge, multiplies self-confidence and provides infinite satisfaction. In other words, a liberal education allows a man to think a little better of himself, to feel a little more sure of himself, to have more faith in himself because he has discovered himself. He also experiences great satisfaction in knowing that he has not neglected the development and expansion of his mind, that he has not let the impressionable years of his youth pass without improving them. But what you carry with you from your alma mater, what you value most there, is not just your knowledge of science, languages, literature, or art. It is something infinitely more sacred, more precious than all that. It is the awakened vision, the discovery of yourself, your powers, your possibilities, your resolution to be a little more man, to play your virile role in life, to make it greater and grander than you could. This will mean infinitely more to you than anything you have learned in books or lectures. However, the most precious thing of all, if you have fully benefited from your opportunity, is the elevation, stimulation, and inspiration you have absorbed from your professors, from your associations. It is the embodiment of the university spirit, the spirit of your alma mater, that should propel you upwards and forwards, making you aspire rather than look down. The graduate must regard his education as a sacred trust, as a power to be used not only for his own progress or selfish ends, but for the betterment of all humanity. Indeed, things are arranged in such a way in this world that no one can use their divine gift solely for themselves and get the best out of it. Trying to preserve it would be as foolish as a farmer keeping his corn seeds in a bucket, rather than giving them to the soil for fear of never recovering them. The man who withholds his contribution to the world does so at his own risk, at the cost of a mental and moral shortage. The way to make the best of ourselves or life is not to try to sell ourselves for the highest price possible without giving ourselves, but with realism and magnanimity to our fellow men. If the rosebud tried to keep all its sweetness and beauty locked inside its petals and refused to give them, it would simply be lost. By offering them to the world, it is possible to reach their full development. The man who tries to keep his education and superior advantages for himself, who is always on the lookout for the main opportunity, distorts and strangles the very faculties he would otherwise develop. The problem for most of us is that in our eagerness to sell ourselves for selfish purposes or to earn more money, we impoverish our own lives and suffocate our best nature. The graduate must show the world that he possesses something too sacred to be manipulated, something marked as non-negotiable, something that corruption cannot touch, that influence cannot buy. You must behave in a way that everyone can see there is something in you that would reject as an insult, the mere suggestion that it could be bought, corrupted, or influenced to lower you to something base or doubtful. The university graduate who is cursed by vulgarity, who sinks into mediocrity, who leads a careless and selfish life, who does not raise his head and show that he has fully benefited from his great privileges, dishonors the institution that gave him his opportunity. He has not learned the best lesson of his school or university, if it is not the secret of making life a glory instead of a sordid routine. When you leave your alma mater, whatever your vocation, do not allow the best of you, your high ideals and noble intentions, to be suffocated or strangled in the eternal struggle for the dollar. Put beauty into your life, and do not let your aesthetic faculties, your aspiring instincts atrophy in efforts to earn a living. Do not sacrifice your social instincts, your friendships, your good name simply for power or position. If you earn money, if you lose money, never sell your divine heritage, your name for a trifle. Whatever you do, be greater than your vocation. Never let it be said that you succeeded in your vocation, but failed as a man. When the sculptor William Story was asked to give a speech for the unveiling of his great statue of George Peabody in London, he simply showed the statue and said, "Here is my speech. Behave in such a way that your life needs no praise in words. Let it be its own praise. Let your success tell the world the story of a noble career. No matter how much money you accumulate, carry with you your greatest wealth, an impeccable record, an immaculate reputation. Thus you will need no houses, land, stocks, or bonds to testify to a rich life. Never before has the educated youth had the opportunity to render such a great service to humanity as the one that presents itself today. What will you do with it? The great prize of life, the supreme fortune of a man, is to be born with an inclination toward an activity, to find it in work and happiness. Emerson, scarcely mentioned in the history of the human intellect, is a poet, an artist, a philosopher, a man of science whose genius was not thwarted by his parents, tutors, or teachers. In these cases, nature seems to have triumphed directly, insisted that her loved ones get their rights, and encouraged disobedience, secrecy, or even running away from home and occasional wandering before the world lost what it had taken so long to produce. Pepe, I hear a voice you cannot hear telling me that I should not stay. I see a hand you cannot see signaling me to leave. I have never seen a young man so idle as you, said his grandmother. Take a book and get to doing something useful. It's been half an hour since you've said a word. Do you know what you've done all this time? You've taken the lid off the teapot and put it back on. You've held a coaster and a spoon alternately above the steam, and you've enjoyed examining and picking up the small drops that form through condensation on the plate and silver. Aren't you ashamed of wasting your time so shamefully? The world gained much from the fact that the old woman did not tell James how to better use his time. But I am useful, pleaded a young man whom a merchant was about to dismiss for his frankness. You are of no use as a salesman, said the boss. I am sure I can be useful, said the young man. How? Tell me how. I don't know, sir, I don't know. Neither do I, said the merchant, laughing at his employee's seriousness. Just don't close me off, sir. Don't do that. Prove to me in something other than selling. I cannot sell. I know I cannot. I know it too, said the director. That's what's wrong, but I can be useful in some way, the young man insisted. I know I can. He was placed in the accounting department, where his aptitude for numbers quickly manifested, and within a few years he became not only the head cashier of the department store, but also an eminent accountant. One cannot look into a cradle and read the secret message, written by a divine hand and wrapped in a piece of clay, just as one cannot see the North Star on a magnetic needle. God has charged the needle of this young life to point toward the star of its own destiny, and although you may pull it with artificial advice and unnatural education, forcing it to point toward the star presiding over poetry, art, law, medicine, or whatever your own vocation may be, until you have wasted years of a precious life. However, once free, the needle returns to its own star. I regret it as the mind always regrets. As Robert Waters says, the man of genius is drawn by an irresistible impulse toward the occupation for which he was created. No matter the difficulties surrounding him or the weakness of the prospects, this occupation is the only one he will pursue with interest and pleasure. When his efforts fail to provide the means of subsistence, and he finds himself poor and abandoned, he may, like Bars, always look back with a sigh and think how much better it would have been if he had chosen another occupation. But despite that, he will remain attached to his preferred occupation. Civilization will reach its peak when every man has chosen his own work. No man can know ideal success until he has found his place. As a locomotive is strong on the tracks but weak elsewhere, as a boat on a river, says Emerson, each young person runs against obstructions from all sides except one. On that side, all obstructions are removed, and he glides serenely down an ever-deepening channel toward an infinite sea. Only a Dickens can write the story of the slavery of children, children whose aspirations and desires were forever stifled by ignorant parents, children persecuted as lazy, stupid, or inconsistent simply because they were out of place, square children forced into round holes, oppressed because they did not fit, children forced to read theological books while their inner voice constantly cried out, law, medicine, art, science, or business, children tortured because they were not enthusiastic in jobs they hated, and against which every fiber of their being expressed perpetual protest. It is always a narrow selfishness in a parent that drives them to want their child to be a reproduction of themselves. "One is enough," said Emerson. John Jacob Astor's father wanted his son to succeed him as a butcher, but the future merchant's commercial instinct was too strong. Nature never duplicates men. It breaks the mold with each birth. The magical combination is used only once. Frederick the Great was terribly mistreated because he was passionate about art and music and showed no interest in military exercises. His father hated the fine arts and imprisoned him, even considering killing his son. But his father's death placed Frederick on the throne at the age of 28. This young man, who thought he was good for nothing because he loved art and music, transformed Prussia into one of the greatest and most recognized nations in Europe. What stupidity and awkwardness the eagle blinks from its perch, but what sharpness in its gaze, what firmness and truth in its curves as it spreads its powerful wings against the bright blue sky. Ignorant parents forced the young Art Wright to become an apprentice barber, but nature had locked a subtle skill in his mind meant to bless humanity and perform the arduous labor of many poor people in England. He had to say, "Leave me alone," even to his parents, as Christ said to his mother, "Don't you know I must be about my Father's business?" Galileo was meant to become a doctor, but when he was forced to study anatomy and physiology, he hid his Euclid and Archimedes to quietly solve abstract problems. He was only 18 when he discovered the principle of the pendulum by observing a swinging lamp in the cathedral at Pisa. He invented the microscope and the telescope, thus expanding knowledge of the vast and the minuscule. Michelangelo's parents had declared that none of their children should ever follow the disreputable profession of an artist, and they even punished him for covering walls and furniture with sketches. But the fire burning in his chest had been ignited by the divine artist and would not let him rest until he had immortalized himself in the architecture of St. Peter's, in the marble of his Moses, and in the walls of the Sistine Chapel. Pascal's father insisted his son learn dead languages, but the voice of mathematics drowned out all other calls, chasing the young man until he set aside grammar to devote himself to Euclid. Joshua Reynolds's father reprimanded him for making drawings and wrote on one of his sketches for mere idleness. However, this young idler became one of the founders of the Royal Academy. Turner was destined to be a barber on Maiden Lane, but he became the greatest landscape painter of modern times. Claude Lorrain, the painter, was an apprentice pastry chef, Molière, a upholsterer, and Guido, the famous painter of Aurora, was sent to a music school. Schiller was sent to study surgery at the military school of Stuttgart, but secretly gave birth to his first work, The Robbers, the premiere of which had to be observed in disguise. The discomfort of his school, which resembled a prison, and his desire to be a tutor drew him so strongly that he ventured penniless into the inhospitable world of letters. A kind lady helped him, and he later produced the two magnificent dramas that made him immortal. Dr. Handel wanted his son to become a lawyer, and he tried to discourage his taste for music. But the young man acquired an old spinet and practiced secretly in an attic. When the doctor visited a brother in the service of the Duke of Winton, he took his son with him. The child quietly made his way to the chapel organ and soon gave a full-volume private concert. The Duke overheard the performance and wondered who could combine such melody with such obvious ignorance of the instrument. The child was brought before him, and the Duke, instead of reprimanding him for disturbing the organ, praised his performance and persuaded Dr. Handel to let his son follow his calling. Daniel Defoe had been a merchant, soldier, trader, secretary, factory manager, commissioner's accountant, and author of several indifferent books before writing his masterpiece, Robinson Crusoe. Wilson, the ornithologist, failed in 5 different professions before finding his way. He spent 4 years in the Navy and then, hoping for quicker promotion, joined the Army. After serving for over 2 years, he once attended, out of curiosity, a tribunal in the town where his regiment was stationed. The presiding judge, a known figure, invited Skye to sit near him and told him that the tribunal's lawyers were among the most eminent in Britain. Keynes watched them speak and thought he could surpass them. He immediately began studying law and eventually became the best legal orator in his country. Stewart studied for the ministry and became a professor before discovering his true calling as a merchant, by the chance of lending money to a friend. The friend, facing imminent failure, insisted that his creditor take the shop as the only means to guarantee repayment of the debt. "Jonathan," said Mr. Chase when his son announced he was going to university, "you'll go down to the machine shop Monday morning." It took many years before Jonathan managed to leave the shop and make his way to become a man of great influence as a U.S. Senator for Rhode Island. It is rightly said that if God charges two angels, one to sweep a crossroad and the other to govern an empire, they could not be persuaded to exchange their duties. Yet it is no less true that one who feels that God has assigned them a specific task can only be happy when they are dedicated to fulfilling it. Blessed is the young man who finds the place his dreams imagined. If he does not find this place, he will find none that will satisfy him. Nature never lets a man rest until he has found his place. She pursues him and urges him until all his faculties give their consent, and he finds his proper niche. A father might decide that the magnetic needle points to Venus or Jupiter without verification, just as he might decide which profession his son must study. What absurdity would be the presentation of a racehorse! Yet it is no more incongruous than the popular idea that law, medicine, and theology are the only desirable professions. It is also ridiculous that 52% of our American university graduates study law. How many young people become poor clerks by trying to imitate their parents who were good lawyers or beggars through the same circumstances? The country is filled with men who are out of their place, disappointed, ruined, unemployed, without money or credit, without worth and without hope. The fact is that almost all college graduates who succeed in the true sense of the term prepare for school but make themselves after graduation. What their professors best taught them was how to study. Once they are beyond the university walls, they stop using books and aids that do not nourish them to grasp those that truly do. We must not conclude that because a man has not succeeded in what he truly tried to do with all his might, he cannot succeed at all. Look at a fish struggling on the sand as if it were about to break. But look again. A huge wave breaks higher on the beach and covers the unfortunate creature. As soon as its fins touch the water, it becomes itself again and rushes through the waves. Its fins now mean something, whereas they once beat the air and the earth in vain, an obstacle instead of a support. If you fail after giving your best, examine the work attempted and check whether it truly aligns with your inclination or ability. Cooper failed as a lawyer. He was so shy he couldn't defend a case, but he wrote some of our finest poems. Molière discovered he was not made for law work, but he left behind a great name in literature. Voltaire and Petrarch abandoned the profession of law. The former chose philosophy, and the latter poetry. Cromwell was a farmer until the age of 40. Very few of us, before reaching adolescence, show great genius or even notable talent for a particular line of work or study. The vast majority of boys and girls, even when given all the latitude and longitude the heart could desire, find it very difficult before the age of 15 or even 20 to decide what they will do to earn their living. Everyone calls the portals of the mind that require a wonderful aptitude for a defined line of work, but that is not the question. This does not justify putting off the task at hand or failing to do the work that naturally belongs to oneself. Samuel Smiles trained in a profession that he did not like, but he worked at it so faithfully that he became the author of what he was destined for. Faithfulness to work, to the daily duties that are available to us, and a true sense of responsibility to our parents, employees, ourselves, and our God will eventually lead most of us to the right niche at the right time. Garfield would not have been president if he had not first been a diligent teacher, a responsible soldier, and a conscientious statesman. Neither Lincoln nor Grant started their lives with a precocity for the White House or an irresistible genius for governing men. Thus, no one should feel disappointed for not having been endowed with extraordinary gifts from birth. Their task is to be the best they can be, wherever chance places them, and to advance with every honorable opportunity in the direction indicated by their inner guide. Let duty be the star that guides us, and success will surely be the crown to match our ability and work. What career? What will be the work of my life? If instinct and heart push you toward carpentry, be a carpenter. If it's medicine, be a doctor with firm resolve and serious work. A young man can only succeed under these conditions, but if there is no instinct, or if it is weak or faint, one must choose with prudence based on the best adaptability and opportunity. No one should doubt that the world needs them. True success lies in fulfilling one's share of work, and this is something everyone can do. It is better to be a first choice than a second-class thing. The world has been very kind to many who were once considered fools or stubborn after they succeeded, but it has been very cruel to them when they struggled against discouragement and misinterpretation. Let us offer all young people a fair opportunity and reasonable encouragement, and not condemn them for a high degree of foolishness. Many of the young people called good-for-nothings, stubborn, idiots, or clumsy were simply young people misplaced, round, and forced to fit into square holes. His mother considered Wellington a fool. At Eton he was called boring, lazy, and slow, and he was almost the last child in school expected to achieve anything. He showed no talent and had no desire to enter the army. His only characteristic in the eyes of his parents and teachers was his hard work and perseverance. But at 46, he had defeated the greatest general alive, except himself. Goldsmith was the fool of his teachers. He received the wooden spoon, a university title for a fool. He tried to enter a surgery class but was rejected and turned to literature. Goldsmith found himself totally unfit for the duties of a doctor, but who else could have written The Vicar of Wakefield or The Deserted Village? Dr. Johnson found him very poor and about to be arrested for debt. He asked Goldsmith to give him the manuscript of The Vicar of Wakefield, sold it to publishers and paid off the debt. This manuscript made its author very famous. Robert Clive, called the Fool, failed at school, but at 32, with 3,000 men, defeated 50,000 on the battlefield and laid the foundations of the British Empire in India. Thus, Walter Scott, when he was at school, was called stubborn by his teacher. When Byron distinguished himself in his class, the master told him, "Now, Yordi, let me see. You'll soon be back to your level." The young Linneo was called almost a fool by his teachers, and not finding him fit for the church, his parents sent him to university to study medicine. But the silent inner master, greater and wiser than all others, led him to the fields, and neither illness, misery, nor poverty could turn him away from the study of botany, his heart's choice, making him the greatest botanist of his time. Richard Sheridan's mother tried in vain to teach him the most elementary studies. The death of his mother awakened dormant talents, as it often happens, and he became one of the brightest men of his time. Samuel Drew was one of the most boring and disillusioned boys in his neighborhood. However, after an accident in which he nearly lost his life and following the death of his brother, he became so studious and diligent that he could not lose a single moment. He read at every meal, making use of every moment he could to improve. He said that Paine's Age of Reason converted him into an author, and it was for his attempt to refute its arguments that he became known for the first time as a strong and vigorous writer. It has been well said that no one has ever made a poor figure by understanding their own talents, nor a good figure by confusing them. What career? Animals discover where their talents lie. A bear will not invent flight. A stuck horse will always debate before trying a door with 5 bars. And a dog, by instinct, will turn away when it sees a pit too deep and wide. But man is the only creature guided by folly who fights against nature. When she cries, "Obstacle," he stubbornly fixes his gaze where his genius bends absurdity in all his plans. Swift said that a man's greatest fortune is to be born for an activity that gives him work and happiness, whether it be making baskets, swords, canals, statues, or songs. Emerson said, "Whatever your natural talent, stay with it. Never leave your path. Be what nature designed you to be, and you will succeed. Be something else, and you will be 10,000 times worse than nothing." Sidney Smith claimed that every man has a forte. For some, it is doing one thing. For others, it is achieving something else. Meanwhile, there are many aimless wanderers whose forte is doing nothing. Twice I have tried to do things that were not my strong suit. The first time, when I was determined to tackle a bold person who had made a hole in my tent, Crown said, "My good lord, come out or you'll run into someone ill-tempered." He replied, "Come in, old waxed liver." So I went in, but he struck me violently on the head and threw me out of the tent onto a pile of grass. He defended himself from the attack and threw me into a mud puddle. When I woke up and undressed from my soaked clothes, I concluded that this was not my strong suit. Now I will raise the curtain on the second view. It is rarely uncommon for someone to seek comfort in the swing, but in a certain village in Ishiani, in the middle of a fall of 18 Myogen grinders, he fell ill with a fever and died. I had never felt so embarrassed in my life and thought I had taken a few glasses of his Titan strangling. The result was that I died so much I didn't even know where I was. I let my wild beasts of prayer run free in the streets, destroying all my waxworks. Then I bet I could play the horse, so I clung to a canal boat, with 2 other horses behind me and 1 in front. But the horses, used to this situation, began to kick and neigh. The result was that I received kicks in the stomach and back, and shortly after, I found myself in the boat with the other horses screaming and shouting like a tribe of savages. Cascaroris was saved, and while I was being taken to the tavern in an annoying cranberry, I said in a weak voice, "Guys, playing the horse is not very strong. Never do anything that is not your strong suit, because otherwise you will find yourself paddling in the Canahuel, figuratively speaking." The following ad appeared day after day in a Western newspaper, but it received no response. Looking for a practical and skilled printer to take charge of any department in a printing house and publishing house. Would accept a chair at any academy. Has no problem teaching ornamental painting, calligraphy, geometry, trigonometry, and other sciences. Has had some experience as a lay preacher. Would have no objection to forming a small class of young ladies and gentlemen to instruct them in advanced subjects. For a dentist or chiropodist, would be invaluable and would gladly accept a position as a bass or tenor singer in a choir. P.S. I will accept an offer to close and cut wood at a price lower than normal. This immediately secured a situation, and the ad ceased to appear. Your talent is your vocation, your legitimate destiny is revealed in your character. If you have found your place, your profession matters with the consent of all the faculties of your being. If possible, choose the profession that concentrates the majority of your experience and tastes. Thus, not only will you have a pleasant vocation, but you will also extensively use your professional skills and knowledge, which are your true capital. Follow your inclination. You cannot satisfactorily struggle against your aspirations for long. Parents, friends, or misfortune may stifle and suppress the desires of the heart, forcing you to perform tasks you don't think you're suited for. But like a volcano, the inner fire will break through the crusts that confine it and pour its repressed genius into eloquence, song, art, or a favorite industry. Beware of a talent you cannot hope to practice perfectly. Nature abhors any work done hastily or unfinished, and will pronounce its curse upon it. It is better to be the Napoleon of shoeshiners or the Alexander of chimney sweeps than to be, as Matthew Arnold said, a lawyer with a shallow mind who, like the need, ignores the laws. Half the world seems to have found an unpleasant occupation, as if the human race had shaken together and exchanged places in the operation. A servant tries to teach, and a master runs a shop. Good farmers kill the law while the scum and Websters run farms, each tortured by the conscience of an unfulfilled destiny. The young sigh in factories instead of struggling with Greek and Latin, and hundreds bend under unnatural burdens at university instead of being on the farm or at the mast. Artists spread stains on the canvas when they should be whitewashing fences behind counters. There are office workers who hate the daily grind and neglect their work to dream of other occupations. A good shoemaker writes some verses for the village newspaper, and his friends call him a poet, abandoning the tools he knows well for the pen he handles clumsily. Shoemakers find themselves discussing at congresses, while statesmen tackle shoe forms. Lay people massacre sermons, while bishops and Whitefields fail in business, and people wonder why the banks are empty. A young man who spends his time with tools is led toward university and begins his journey to a lower position in one of the 3 honorable professions. Real surgeons wield the meat saw and knife to amputate human limbs. How fortunate it is that there is a divinity that shapes our ends, adapting them to our will. He who has a profession, says Franklin, possesses a fortune, and he who has a vocation has a place of utility and honor. A plough on one's legs is higher than a knight on his knees. A man's trade is more beneficial for him than anything else. It hardens his muscles, strengthens his body, quickens his blood, sharpens his mind, corrects his judgment, awakens his inventive genius, implements his intelligence, propels him in the race of life, awakens his ambition, and makes him feel that he is a man, that he must fill the shoes of a man, do the work of a man, play his role in life, and show himself as a man. No man feels like a man if he does not do the work of a man. A man without work is not a man. He does not prove by his actions that he is what he is. 150 pounds of bones and muscles do not make a man. A good skull filled with brain does not make a man. The bones, muscles, and brain must know how to do the work of a man, think the thoughts of a man, trace the path of a man, and bear the weight of a man's character and duty before they constitute what he is. The ability to act is the first condition of success. The second is perseverance in ordinary circumstances and with the practical sense to guide. He who possesses these qualities will thrive. Do not expect to get a higher position or a larger salary. Improve the position you already hold, add originality to it, fill it like never before. Be faster, more energetic, more thorough, and more polite than your predecessor or your colleagues. Study your craft and propose new methods of working. Be able to make improvements for your employer. Art does not simply reside in satisfaction. It is not just about filling your position, but doing it better than expected, surprising your employer, and the reward will be a better position and a higher salary. When you are unemployed, take the first respectable job that presents itself without worrying about the mismatch between your skills and the task. If you put your energy into your work, you will soon be entrusted with something better to do. This issue of the correct goal in life has become extremely confusing in our time. It is not a complicated problem to solve when one is the son of a Zulu or the daughter of a Bedouin. The wild condition allows only one choice, but as one rises up the ladder of civilization and approaches the great centers of activity, the difficulty of making the right choice increases with its importance. When faced with fierce competition, it is of the highest necessity to choose the correct goal in order to focus all your energy and enthusiasm. In the struggle for success, dissipating strength or hope is fatal to prosperity. Even in the most attractive field, Gladstone says there is a limit to the work that can be demanded from the human body or brain, and it is a wise man who does not waste energy on activities for which he is unqualified. Blessed is the one who has found his work. Carlyle says that he asks for no other blessing. He has a job, a purpose in life, he has found it and he will pursue it. When you choose a vocation, do not ask how you can earn more money or gain more fame. Choose the work that will bring out all your powers and develop your masculinity with the greatest strength and symmetry. What you want is not money, fame, or even glory, but power. Masculinity is greater than wealth and fame, and character is greater than any career. Every faculty must be educated, and any deficiency in its training will manifest in everything you do. The hand must be trained to be graceful, firm, and strong. The eye must be trained to be alert, discerning, and precise like a microscope. The heart must be educated to be tender, understanding, and sincere. Memory must be exercised for years in precision, retention, and breadth. The world does not require that you be a lawyer, minister, doctor, farmer, scientist, or merchant. It does not dictate what you must do, but it demands that you be a master in whatever you undertake. If you are a master in your field, the world will applaud you, and all doors will open for you. But you must condemn all trifles, abortions, and failures. He who is well educated to fulfill a man's duty, says Abus, cannot be unprepared for any position, no matter how insignificant. I do not care whether my students are destined for the army, the ministry, or the bar. Nature predestines us to the professions of human life before our role in society. Living is the profession I want to teach them. When he has finished with himself, it is certain that he will be neither a soldier, nor a lawyer, nor a clerk, but he will first be a man. Fortune may move him from one rank to another as it pleases, but he will always find his place in the great career of life. Common sense has the advantage over wealth, diploma, pedigree, talent, and genius. Without tact and common sense, they are worthless. The incapable and incompetent, even if loaded with diplomas and titles, remain behind. The question of the century is not what you know or who you are, but what you are and what you can do. George Herbert said that what we are is far more important for us than what we do. A goal that carries the slightest doubt about its justice, honor, or rights must be abandoned immediately. The art of distributing evil so that it appears and seems like good has been cultivated in all eras. It is curious to observe that reason, under pressure, overcomes the instinct of what is right in a man. A prominent scientist said that a man could soon reason himself the instinct of decency if he tried hard enough and worked sufficiently for it. When one is presented with a doubtful but attractive future, There is a great temptation to manipulate evil so that it seems good. However, any immoral goal carries within it the seed of certain failure. In true success, there is a physical and spiritual failure. There is no doubt that every person has a particular aptitude for their unique role in life. Only some, the so-called geniuses, manifest it unusually and very early in life. Madame de Staël plunged into political philosophy at an age when other girls were still playing with dolls. Mozart, at only 4 years old, played the clavichord and composed minuets and other pieces that are still preserved today. Little Chalmers, with a solemn air and serious gestures, always preached from a stool in the nursery. Rocket wrote tragedies at the age of 12, and Grotius published a skilled philosophical work before he turned 15. Pope Siaba, in numbers, Chatterton wrote good poems at 11, and Coley published a volume of poetry at 16. Thomas Lawrence and Benjamin West had been drawing portraits almost since they could barely walk. Liszt performed in public at 12, and Canova made clay models when he was barely a child. They exposed the defects of Aristotle's philosophy when he was only 16. Napoleon was at the head of the armies when he was throwing snowballs at Brienne. All showed their inclination when they were young and followed it in their active lives. But precocity is not common, and except in rare cases we must discover the inclination in our nature and not wait for the proclivity to manifest. What is within us is worth more than a nugget of gold. "I have not forbidden you to preach," said a bishop to a young clergyman, "but nature does. Lowell says it is the vain effort to make us what we are not that has sown history with so many aborted projects and lives abandoned to emptiness. You will not have found your place until all your faculties are awakened, and your nature consents to and approves the work you do. Not until you are so enthusiastic that you will carry it with you to bed. It may be that you are forced to do less pleasant work for a time, but emancipate yourself as soon as possible." Carey, the devoted cobbler, before leaving as a missionary, said, "My job is to preach the gospel. I make shoes to cover the costs. If your vocation is simply humble, elevate it with more seriousness than others do. Put your brain, heart, energy and economy into it. Develop it with originality of methods. Expand it through enterprise and industry. Study it as if it were a profession. Learn everything you need to know about it. Focus your faculties on it. For the greatest successes are reserved for the man with a single purpose, whose powers are not divided by rival empires of the soul. It is better to adorn yours than to seek another's place. Go deep into your trade. If you want to reach the top, nothing is small regarding your work. Master every detail." This was the secret to the great success of A.T. Stewart and John Jake Baston. They knew everything about their business. Just as love is the only excuse for marriage and will surely guide you through the problems and disappointments of married life, love for an occupation is what will guide you safely and surely through the difficulties that overwhelm 95 people out of 100 choosing the life of a merchant, and many others in any other career. A famous Englishman said to his nephew, "Do not choose medicine, for we have never had a murderer in our family, and it is very likely that with your ignorance you could kill a patient. As for the bar, no prudent man is willing to risk his life or fortune with a young lawyer who not only lacks experience, but is often too arrogant to understand the risks he is taking with his client, who is the only one who loses. Thus, just as the mistakes of a clerk in doctrine or in advice to his parishioners cannot be clearly determined in this world, I advise you by all means to enter the church," said White, thus revealing the secret of his great power. It is the man who embarks on law, literature, medicine, the ministry, or any other saturated profession who will succeed. His certain vocation, his love for it, and his fidelity are the imperative factors of his career. If a man enters a profession simply because his grandfather gained great renown in it, or because his mother wants him to, without love or adaptability for it, he would be much better off working as a driver of an electric car, earning $1.75 a day in the humblest of jobs. His intelligence might make him a leader in another field. He could cause as much harm as a misfired shell on a railroad track, a threat to the next express. Not long ago, marriage was the only sphere open to young girls, and an unmarried woman had to face the disapproval of her friends. The woman who thinks is like a man who wears ridiculous lipstick, they say. It hasn't been many years since the ambitious woman who dared to study or write had some embroidery at hand to throw over her book or manuscript when visitors arrived. Dr. Gregory told his daughters that if they happened to have knowledge, They should keep it as a deep secret from men, who generally looked with envious and malicious eyes at a woman with great qualities and an educated mind. Women who wrote books at the time denied the accusation, as if it were a public disgrace. All of this has changed, and what a change! As Franz Willard said, the greatest discovery of the century is the discovery of women. We have emancipated them and opened countless opportunities to our daughters outside of marriage. Once, only a boy could choose a career. Now his sister can too. This freedom is one of the greatest glories of the 20th century. But with freedom comes responsibility. And with these changed conditions, every girl must have a defined purpose. Dr. Hall says that the world urgently needs girls who are the right hand of their mother, capable of cuddling the little ones by their mother's side and untangling the knots of daily life when things go awry. Girls in whom the father finds comfort for something more than beauty and whose older brothers are proud of something beyond their ability to dance or shine in society. Moreover, we want sensible girls with a clean standard, independent of conventions and sufficiently autonomous to live by this standard. Girls who do not wear a trailing dress in the street to avoid germs and other profanations, who do not wear top hats at the theatre nor high heels that jeopardize their health, and who do not wear corsets. Girls who wear what is beautiful and appropriate and who snub the dictates of fashion when they are horrid and foolish. We want well-bred, sweet girls who speak straight from the heart, innocent, pure and simple, with less knowledge of sin, duplicity and malice at 20 than a 10-year-old girl often has. We aspire to attentive and careful girls who will think of their generous father, who strives to keep them comfortable, and their sweet mother who deprives herself so they can have as many beautiful things as possible, knowing how to assess the cost and draw the line between what is essential and what is not, striving to save rather than spend, disinterested young girls eager to be a joy and comfort in the house rather than a cost and an unnecessary burden. We want girls with hearts full of tenderness and sympathy, with tears that flow for the ills of others, and smiles that light up their own and beautiful thoughts. We have many intelligent, brilliant, and ingenious young girls. What we ask for is a series of joyful girls, warm-hearted and impulsive, friendly and entertaining with their own circle, with little desire to shine in the noisy world. With a few girls like this, life would refresh us all, like the climate under the effect of summer rains. The sphere of women is often talked about as if it has a limit. There is no place on earth or in the sky, no task for humanity, no blessing or affliction, no murmur of yes or no, no life, death, or birth that holds the weight of a single feather's value without a woman in it. Do what is assigned to you, says Emerson, and you cannot expect too much or dare too much. Right now, for you, there is a courageous and grand expression, like that of Phidias's colossal chisel, or the palette of the Egyptians, or the pen of Moses or Dante, but very different from all these expressions. The best way to begin for a young person who has neither friends nor influences, says Russell Sage, is to first find a job, then keep your mouth shut, observe well, be faithful, make your employer believe he would be lost in the mist without you, and finally be polite. Close application, integrity, attention to detail, and discreet publicity are the 4 steps to success for John Wanamaker, whose credo is, do what you do in life, be greater than your vocation. Most people view an occupation or vocation as merely a way to earn a living. What a petty and narrow perspective for what one is meant to be. The great school of life, the great developer of man, the builder of character, what should broaden, deepen, elevate, and round off in symmetry, harmony, and beauty all the faculties that God has given us. Just as we reject the task and avoid the lessons meant to unfold the great possibilities of life into utility and power, just as the sun unfolds the petals of the flower into beauty and fragrance. I am happy to think that I am not obliged to turn the world, but only to discover and joyfully fulfill the work that God designates. Jern Ingelow asks, what can I do to be known forever? Your duty always. That makes many people remain unknown or never remain known. Don't you think that those who are not known by the trumpets of angels in the sky have their divine praise breathed upon them? That is their fate.